Sacred Symbols, a PlayStation podcast, is brought to you by, well, you. If you want to learn how to support our show, go to patreon.com/laststandmedia. Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to Sacred Symbols Plus, a PlayStation podcast supplement, episode number unknown. My name is Colin Moriarty. Today, I'm joined by... I actually have to ask him after I introduce him if we've ever done a one-on-one for Sacred Symbols before. But anyway, his name is Ben Smith, very special guest, associate producer of Last Stand Media. He's the man who edits all of the audio and does many other things, does our live show stuff and so on and so forth. Ben, good to see you. How are you? Welcome.
I'm good. I hope you're doing well also. I don't think you and I have ever done I don't know if you and I have ever been on a podcast together since like Fireside Chats.
Right. Well, that's what I was thinking. But I was thinking maybe we did something. You weren't on anything else with me since then? That's interesting. I believe
I've been on other LSM stuff, but I don't think with you. Yeah.
Well, welcome to Sacred Symbols Plus with me. Now, this is episode number unknown because I'm not totally confident that something's not going to happen, which will bump the numbers because all the Spartacus rumors at the time we're recording this. However, this is a review discussion and Spoilercast for Horizon Forbidden West, the Guerilla Games open world action RPG for PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5, probably for PC at some point in the future. Now, Ben, I'm not a huge fan of the spoiler-free discussion stuff.
Yeah.
We do that on the show, the regular show, and we've talked about Horizon extensively in a spoiler-free way, but I know that some people like that at the beginning and maybe want to duck out. I will say that beyond that point, I don't think you should listen to this show unless you've played both Horizon 1 and 2, because I'm going to spoil both of them.
Yes.
But do you want to kind of just begin with a spoiler-free series of thoughts, as it were?
Sure.
Kind of give people a little bit of an insight into how you feel about the game. How did you feel about Horizon Forbidden West?
So I really enjoyed it. I waited a few years to play, maybe a couple years to play Zero Dawn, and I regretted that I had because it just wasn't on my radar for whatever reason. And once I played it, I thoroughly enjoyed it. So I was, day one on Forbidden West, and I will say that it was better than I expected. And that wasn't to say I had low expectations. I just didn't expect it to be as good as it was. I think it's a good story. It's not an amazing story. It's visually immaculate. I don't think that I had any issues at all with. I've seen a lot of people talking about bugs and stuff. I didn't have any of that stuff until like about 50 hours into the game, and even then, it was not egregious, and it was like clipping stuff and things like that. But before that point, I never really noticed it. So, I mean, overall, I'm impressed. I think it's a great entry. I'm not especially thrilled with the ending, but we won't get into that quite yet, I don't think.
Yeah, we'll get there indeed, but yeah, not quite yet. I guess my just additional spoiler-free thoughts here about Horizon Forbidden West, and again, I don't want to be redundant because I talked about it so extensively in this way on Sacred Symbols itself, but just to kind of begin things off for people that didn't listen or want reiteration, I think Horizon Forbidden West is fantastic, and we'll get into this. I'm a little annoyed by the weird way I think it's being treated in some corners. I think it's strange, and here's the best way I can put this in a spoiler-free way is to say, if you like open world games, if you like action RPGs and kinetic sort of fast-moving, more Japanese style games, I would say, than the heavier Elden Rings, which is ironically a Japanese game with a more Western aesthetic and more of a Western feel and heaviness, a computer type feel, I would say.
Yeah.
If you like the more arcadiness, the fast-moving nature of the action RPG, if you like open worlds, if you like both melee and range combat, if you like side quests and things to do and places to explore, I don't know that there's almost any game that does any of that better than this. And I'm not saying that it's one of the very best games of all time, but it is a really, really great game. And in that genre, in some ways, very similar to how I feel about The Witcher 3 and later Dying Light, both 2015. Well, actually, it would be Dying Light first and then Witcher 3 in the order that they came out. This seems like a step up for open world games to me. Things feel a little more purposeful. Things feel a little more fleshed out. This game feels and is expensive. This game feels and was focus tested. This game is in a lot of different ways. I think it excels. And I think much like Zero Dawn in 2017, it coming out near another game that it will be compared to, favorably or unfavorably, I think has injured it. And I think that people have really leaned into that this time,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is strange because you would imagine that Zelda would have brought out that want to lean into it more.
Right.
But I think people saw Horizon Zero Dawn more for what it was at that time. And
Mm-hmm.
Horizon Forbidden West comes out next to Elden Ring. Now, I played Elden Ring for 20 hours. It's not really my kind of game. I think Forbidden West is a superior game in every way to me, but I was also telling people that I think Far Cry 6 is a superior game to Elden Ring. So it's like we all have our different sort of tastes. However, I do feel like the game isn't really getting its full fair look from some people. And I
Yeah.
hope that that little rant changes some people's minds to go check it out. And I'm disappointed in learning that a lot of people that kind of set the cadence, as they often do with media, people that get pre-release access to games, they didn't play this game completely. They rushed through
Mm-hmm.
it. When you hear that people did, oh, I did it in 25 hours, I did it in 30 hours. Like, how?
Right.
How could you have possibly done that?
Yeah.
So any thoughts on that before we move on?
Yeah, I have a couple thoughts. I think that Zero Dawn did get some of the same pushback, but it wasn't as directly compared to Zelda that came out directly next to it, like this one's being compared to Elden Ring. And I think that also we've experienced more fatigue in the open world since then. Like there's been so many more open world games since then that have really either been alongside of or even copied, whether on purpose or inadvertently, a lot of stuff that games like this have been perpetuating, especially with people that just keep comparing it to Ubisoft series and stuff like that. So I think that that's some valid criticism, and there's some fatigue there. But I disagree with many of the people casting stones at it simply for the fact that they're people that I know to not enjoy open world games. And it's like, if you don't prefer, or even, and I don't prefer, I guess, but if you don't enjoy and appreciate open world games, this is not a game for you. This is an open world game. And it is sometimes fetch questy, and it is sometimes full of map markers. And like, I get all that, but that is the type of game this is. And for the type of game this is, it's near amazing. Like it's really, really phenomenal. But I understand if you have that fatigue, or you have that desire to play something that's a little different than what you've been playing for years. Sure, this game's going to seem a little lackluster. But in a vacuum, I can't really see how Forbidden West is a bad game by any standard.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And maybe people wouldn't necessarily say that about it either. But yeah, it feels, I don't know. There's something mean spirited, I think, in some
Yeah,
way about the way it's being treated.
sure.
And it does remind me of the way The Last of Us Part 2 was treated as well. And it's interesting that those two games are kind of kindred in my mind, because the last game that I felt this passionate about, I think, from first party or second party was The Last of Us Part 2, which I thought was just, is
Sure.
in my mind, conclusively PS4's best game. But
Right.
I know a lot of people disagree with that, and that's totally fine. But that was an experience for me. I just couldn't believe how good I that game was. And
Sure.
in between now and then was, let's see, Ghost of Tsushima, which I liked, and Miles Morales, which I thought was great, and Ratchet and Clank, which I thought was a little underwhelming, Returnal, which I thought was surprising. So there's no, I'm not like really a PlayStation advocate for their first or second party games just as a rule. They have
Mhm.
to kind of go above and beyond and prove something to me. And this series, since I first played it at E3 in 2016, has blown me away. I think it's something special, but I think you're right that because it comes from a genre and hails from a genre that is very worn, and that these
Mhm.
games take so long to make, that it's hard for them to turn the ship mid development. So
Yep.
something that they're inspired by in 2017 or 2018 comes into their game that comes out in 2022. It's just the nature of the beast. I do understand that level of fatigue. I just don't really experience it because I love I love these kinds of
Sure.
games.
Right.
So to me, I'm like, okay, I'll fucking play a Far Cry game every year. I'll play a Horizon every year, just like I'll play a Castlevania Symphony of the Night every year, or whatever the case might be. So anyway,
Well, and I
I'm
think
sorry. Go
for
ahead.
for people like me, and to a larger extent people like you, like it satisfies that OCD part of our brain, that checkboxy part of our brain. I get it. Like I very much align with that to some extent. It doesn't mean that's all I ever want to play, and nor does it mean that's all you ever want to play. But like for us, it is that very like checkbox mentality. And if you don't like that, I understand, but that doesn't I don't think that gives it a reason to not be like. I have seen people just straight up saying it's a trash game, and maybe that's some trolling. I don't know, but I just heartily disagree with that from a quality and everything other perspective. So
Yeah, I don't think there's anything this game does that's anything less than great. I mean, that's my opinion.
right.
Now, there are a lot of good games, and
Mhm.
we play a lot of them, and we highlight a lot of them. So it's not to say that everything is for everyone, but yeah, there's something a little weird and unpleasant about
Yeah.
what's surrounding this game, and it does remind me of The Last of Us, although it's not nearly as bad as that, and this game is not nearly as good as The Last of Us Part 2, which I think is a game that kind of sits amongst a small pantheon of games.
Sure.
But nonetheless, let's get into spoiling this game now. So that's it. We'll cut that out now. You guys can go if you don't want to hear anymore, but this is for people that have played and beaten Horizon Forbidden West, and I would say Zero Dawn is going to get spoiled for sure. So I don't know why you would play one without the other, but
Yeah.
since there are the first two games in what we know now will be a trilogy, I think pretty safely. Now, I wanted to start at the top because we have, first of all, a series of questions, inquiries, roads to go down from the audience. You guys always submit good stuff, especially when I put up the threads for Spoilercast and review discussions. You guys allow us
Mhm.
to get some really good stuff here. And as usual, I want to let you, the audience, steer our ship over on Patreon. And this will be free eventually for everyone. So if you like what we do, patreon.com/laststandmedia to participate and be over there with everyone. But I wanted to actually just, before I even get into their inquiries, I want to ask you, because you said something which doesn't surprise me because a lot of people are saying it, but it's something I really somewhat disagree with, which is that you feel like the story was a little lackluster and that the way the game ends is maybe not to your liking. I actually found the Far Zenith stuff fucking awesome. I was like, what is that? As I said on the show, I don't think anyone could predict what the game's actually about. Like, it would be really unfortunate for it to be spoiled for someone because you'll never know what it was about. And
Right.
so I like the idea of this rich group of, like, literally, I think there's really like 70 or 80 of them. They leave the Earth when it's being destroyed. They go to another star system. They have all of this repository of information about Apollo and the Apollo repository, and they give themselves everlasting life, and then they create something out of their control, and they come back to Earth and use it as bait, basically, to get away. I think that's, now whether or not that's good or not is to be discussed, and we will discuss that. But I like that at least it wasn't what I thought it was.
Right.
And there's no way that I would have thought that was what it was about. Although we do know at the end of Zero Dawn that Silence has Hades, so
Yeah.
we know that it's not quite over there. But what about it sits right with you, and I guess doesn't sit right with you from a high level?
Yeah, so I would agree with most of what you said there, that I think it is, at least at first, an unpredictable venture. I don't think that I saw it going to the sci-fi extents that it did with the Far Zenith storyline and stuff like that. Once they expose that that's part of the plot here, that we have these Far Zeniths who are otherworldly, essentially, uh, then from there, I'm like, okay, well, this, I mean, up until the very last, like, 10 minutes of the storyline, I feel like from there it was kind of predictable in the beats it would go and stuff like that. Of course, when you find out at the end about Nemesis and all that kind of stuff, then that changes things drastically. But I did enjoy the huge plot twist of, this isn't just about restoring Earth. This is about, essentially, you know, people left here and are coming back to reclaim it, essentially. So that did surprise me. The reason I said I had a problem with the ending isn't necessarily because of any of the story beats or the story itself. It's just because it goes from, this is what we think the game is about, to, this is what the story is actually about, and the motives and everything, within a matter of about 5 minutes. And then people become friends who weren't friends before, and they start working together, and everybody changes their perspective. And then all of a sudden they're just like, all right, well, let's go do our thing. Let's go around and kill some more robot dinosaurs. So for me, it was just like, I liked the story. I wish they had expanded a little more on that last. If they turned that last 10 minutes into the last hour, I feel like that would have been more satisfying for me personally. I don't have any problem with the direction of the story. I thought it was actually really good, and I love sci-fi, so I thought that part was great. I just didn't really like the fact that it's like it just barely let you taste that part of it, and then was like, all right, see you in 5 more years. And
Yeah,
that was a bit of an issue for me.
to that point, and I guess we can talk about this a little later more in depth. I do wonder if maybe there's some DLC plan
Yeah,
that will try to bridge the gap, because I didn't actually play the Frozen Wilds for Zero Dawn. I meant to, but I just never got to it. But in reading kind of the plot synopsis, it doesn't seem to be very important So I'm
Yeah.
hoping that this is a little more important than that. But
Sure.
I want to bring this question in actually from chat. He asks, he says, "Hey guys, I love the gameplay and exploration in Horizon Forbidden West, but I found the story a bit disappointing. In particular, I'm curious what you guys thought of the Far Zenith plot. It didn't really work for me, as I didn't think any of the Zeniths themselves were particularly interesting or well developed as characters, and the explanation of their backstory I found to be a bit lacking. I'll be interested to hear your thoughts. Thanks for the great shows you guys put out. Keep it up." See, I wanted to bring this up. Thank you, chat, for writing in. I wanted to bring his inquiry up because I think that, much like the entire game at large, I think that the Far Zenith plot itself requires you to do a little bit of work as the player to
Yeah.
understand what they're doing. You need to go talk to people. You need to talk to Beta specifically when she's in the base, and you need to probe the different angles of the conversation, which I love. The almost Fallout like conversation trees, which I didn't really expect to be so deep
Mm-hmm.
in this game, and I really enjoyed that. I liked actually going back to the base in between missions and talking to everyone and just kind of getting more. I feel like people are confused, and you can see it through the trophies. People are confused because they didn't play the game completely, and that's totally fine. But if you're not going to listen to the audio files and you're not going to like talk to everyone, you're not going to explore and see things, then yeah, the Far Zenith thing is a little confusing. And just to kind of explain it to people, because I think Ben had already said, and we'd already known, like, this is the way it ends with Nemesis and this AI kind of rogue thing that they create. But they start as this like rich company that ends up being backstabbed and backstabbing other companies and doing all this fucked up shit on Earth and then leaving. So there's a lot to explore. It doesn't really hit you over the head with it, and I like that. It feels very unique to games. I feel like if this was if all the cutscenes and some interstitial gameplay were just a movie or a TV show, I
Mm-hmm.
feel like people would be like, "Well, this Far Zenith thing doesn't make any sense," and I totally get that. But the good news is that this is a video game, so
Right.
you can go and like take the time to see everything. And I'm not. It's not a. I'm not blaming you for that. It's just that that annoys me a little bit because it's all there,
Mm-hmm.
and it reminds me of when Dagan and I did BioShock for Knockback, and he played the entire game without listening to the audio
Yeah.
file or listening. And I'm like, what the fuck are you talking? I couldn't even understand. I'm like, what are you talking about? Do you even know what anything's about? How do
Yeah.
you even know?
Right.
It's just confounding to me. So do you think that maybe it's the lack of legwork that maybe some people are putting in, or is there really like some plot holes here? Because I kind of do understand. I understand the Ted Faro,
Mm-hmm.
the Tate virus, and the betrayal over Apollo and the Gaia backup and all of this. It's complicated, but it's there, and you can understand
Right.
it if you want.
Yeah, I definitely understood all that. I got all that. Um, I think I probably, and it wasn't for lack of, it was for lack of trying. It wasn't for lack of wanting to. But I probably only got about, I say only, it's probably a large amount, 80-ish% of the the audio files and the extra documents and stuff like that. Just because like I wasn't going to run around scanning for purple things
Right.
for hours and hours. But so I listened and read every one of those that I encountered. To kind of fill out that story. So for me, that part made sense and was fulfilling. But I can definitely understand if you're not somebody who is going to do that extra little bit of work, then it's going to be unfulfilling. And I have a couple. I mean, I have like contrary thoughts about that. One, if you don't explore all the game has to offer you, then you shouldn't complain that it doesn't provide you with everything you wanted. But on the other hand, should so much of the game's backstory and narrative be in missable things, admissible collectibles and stuff like that? So like that's a game design philosophy that I don't even have reconciled in my own mind as far as what is good and what is bad. But I do think it's worth pointing out that like yes, you can get more information, but no, they didn't provide it to you in a way that you would absolutely get it in order to enjoy that plot. So I'm a little back and forth there, but I do think that um, the Zenith. I think that's what his our question was originally about. The Zeniths are really cool, and I really like them, and I like the idea of a very greedy group of individuals who go off to do their own thing. I won't talk about it because it spoils it, but I watched another piece of media recently where that happened, and it was like, yeah, this is exactly what would happen in our world, is that some people would leave and leave the rest of us to die regardless of what they want to say. But the one thing that just rubbed me the wrong way, and I don't think it was a plot hole or anything like that, I just didn't like that they were like basically immortal, like they were still living forever. It just kind of rubbed me the wrong way. I understand the logic and I understand how it happened and I understand all that, but I was just like, okay, like couldn't we have just made this like a generation ship that went off and they come back and they're even worse than the people on Earth were before they left or something like that. but that's just me doing a little plot work on my own. That's not necessarily, I'm not saying they should have done that or shouldn't have done that, but that part just didn't hit right for me.
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually enjoyed that only
Mm-hmm.
because from my perspective, I'm like, it's interesting to see the fusion of three different types of people, basically. The humans that are revived after the end of the world, that are given this
No.
tribal kind of culture,
Yeah.
clones, just a few of them, but clones
Right.
of the original people, and then actual people that were there,
Right.
all interacting with each other, including the clones interacting with their original originators and all of that. I find that pretty cool. But
The one thing
yeah,
I did think about while playing it is they have the ability to clone people, and they went off and created their own colony, their own world essentially. But there's only X amount of them left. Why didn't they just start cloning more people to repopulate or whatever that it would be, to build up their society to be more grand than it was? And maybe that's part of the selfishness, that they didn't feel the need to do that, or part of the immortality kind of thing that they felt like they didn't need to do that to survive. But to me, it just was kind of would have been an extra little thing. Like they come back and there's 8 tildas of varying ages. I thought that would have been cool. I don't know if it makes sense necessarily, but they definitely have that ability to make clones of people.
yeah, you're right. I wonder what is behind that. I guess they would explain it as saying like the creation of Nemesis itself was this vanity project
Hmm.
that said that they don't need organics at all,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
so they maybe eschewed that entire line of thinking as just being beneath them. I don't know, but
yeah.
it is interesting at the end though. And do we have a question about this? Actually, I wanted to. No, I guess not. So I didn't want to override anyone writing in about this, but it is interesting at the end that we just get a little taste
Yeah.
too. Like as you said, like they just give you a little scoop. But I like that it seems much more literal that there'll be a third one as opposed to the way the first one ended. It was pretty obvious that there would be a sequel, but it didn't
Right.
seem necessary per se. Silence has Hades is different than Earth is going to end, and so
Mhm.
that's exciting too. We'll see what comes of that. Um, but I will say this: I wanted to bring up completion percentage real quick. Mitchell Lunsberg wrote in and said, "Gentlemen, can you give us a quick rundown on your percentage completion and your favorite and least favorite activities in the game?" I am at 66% with a few more missions to finish the main story. I can't wait to hear your thoughts since I enjoyed your Returnal spoiler cast. So I wanted to bring this up because we were talking about how much time you have to put in and how much effort you have to put in to really see everything. And I was surprised. I went back after I beat the game and looked when you're bounced back to the open world. My completion percentage was 88.52%. I thought it would be more than that, but it's not. I'm not even really sure what I exactly missed.
Mhm.
So it suggests that I missed quite a bit. So that's interesting. But I still dumped like 75 solid hours into the game. And I played it similar to Far Cry 6, the way I played that, and Outriders, the way I played that. I just played it very organically. When I knew that there was only one missable trophy in the game, which
Mhm.
was resolved at the end, basically, I just knew for my OCD, I'm like, I'm just going to relax and play. I'm not going to worry about the trophies. We're going to talk about those
Yeah.
more literally, but I just kind of played it. Did you feel fulfilled in playing it the way you did? How long did you play it? Did you know what your completion percentage is?
Yeah, so I saw this question and I looked earlier today. Um, and my completion percentage was like 81%, and my playtime, and I think there might have been a little variation here because I think one time I left it on while I went and made dinner or something like that. So it could be a couple hours off, but it was right around 72 hours from what I can figure. So
Nice.
I feel like I put a fair amount of time into it, and saw almost everything. The things that I think weren't discovered were probably like, or the parts of the map that I didn't go to or whatever, to not get that 100% or even 90 or whatever. Um, I'm guessing were things like, the unknown X machine areas, or the unknown campfire in an area that I never really needed to explore that much. There weren't a lot of those because a lot of times, like, I would just go to an area just so it was uncovered in case I needed to come back and find it later or fast travel to it or whatever. But yeah, I played the majority of it, for sure. I feel like I saw everything that there was to see. There were a few times though where I walked into an area and I was like, "Is this like literally a reskin of somewhere else?" And then other times I walked into an area, I'm like, I'm 70 hours into this game and I've never seen an environment like this before yet. It's like, that's cool. So there
Yeah.
there was a little bit of good and bad there.
Yeah, you're right. And yeah, we'll talk about the scale of the world because I think that that's an interesting thing, the way they kind of represent that. I think it makes you have to use your imagination a little bit about the way she's getting around. It's almost a very JRPG like. I want to really explore that in a little while. But
Mhm.
yeah, I was surprised even in looking back and preparing, going back into the game and looking at all of the files and everything for notes. There was even a character box that was missing. And I'm like, who?
Yeah.
Like who? I don't know who I could possibly have missed. I did. There's nothing available for me to do. I don't know what I'm missing. And I even went into the cloud, even after you get up all the tall necks and undo the map, there's still cloudy little corners. And I even went to those.
Right.
I'm like, I don't know what I'm missing. So it is kind of intriguing. And I kept going into the percentage complete stuff when I was doing stuff to see if it would count. Like when you find those one-off caverns, that doesn't count, for instance, even though it tells you when it's complete. And I was trying to figure out like, what could it be? But I wasn't able to do it. But since we brought up trophies, or I brought up trophies, of course, I guess I'll just cover them now. Mackenzie wrote in and said, "Howdy, my fellow foul fondlers. Finished the game and cleaned up the map. I noticed that I wasn't getting trophies for completing side missions. I checked out the trophies, and there were none for the side quests involving collectibles, such as drones and black boxes. I was disappointed because earning trophies incentivizes my ADD-addled brain to complete the game and finish the trophy list. I'm wondering, how did you feel about this and how far you are with them?" So you got the platinum, I think, right? I also did. So we've gotten them completely. And I did want to point out that it was my 128th platinum. So I really obviously like trophies. And I am becoming a little disappointed with what seems to be happening with PlayStation first party trophy lists, which is that they're becoming easy and not like too easy, but easy. And I noticed that first with Miles Morales, and I noticed that a little bit with Ratchet, which didn't require, for instance, which is fine, but like a new game plus playthrough or whatever, just didn't seem to really care. And this game feels a similar way where I'm like, this is the kind of game that should take advantage of the metagame. Every side quest or bronzes for all the side quests, find every black box, get every tall neck, blah, blah, blah. And it just seemed very selective and very weird. And I agree that I was surprised how few trophies I was getting as I was doing things. And again, because I wasn't trying to focus 1-to-1 because I knew nothing was going to be missable, I was just like, oh, what am I supposed to earn them for? And it was for stupid stuff. Like there were trophies like upgrade each of these bags once each, or I'm like, what? Or find one black box, do one tall neck. And I'm like, this is stupid. What about kind of enticing me to see everything you've put into this wonderful game? I felt like it was almost counterproductive and suggested that there wasn't as much in the game as there might be. How did you feel about that?
So to start, my trophy philosophy pretty much is I don't go for trophies if I like the game a lot and I complete it and still want to keep playing, generally is when I'll look at the trophies and actually go for them. Sometimes if I get a trophy, I'll open it up and then I'll be like, oh, what other trophies are there? And I'll look through them. But for this one, I didn't look at the trophies until basically after I had finished it, finished the storyline at least. I did see someone mention that there was a missable trophy at the end. So I did ask in our Discord, without spoilers, could you just tell me what this trophy is so I don't miss it? So I did look at that one, but because I kind of had the impression that I would go after it. I don't even know how many platinums I have, 20-ish, 30-ish, I don't know, somewhere in there. But for me, I really enjoyed that after the fact of going in and knocking off all the trophies. But the thing, since I didn't look at them originally, I was like, oh, well, surely these survey drones are going to be a trophy. I'll go and make sure I get all of those. And I went and got all of them. And then I was like, oh, I must be missing one. The trophy didn't pop for it. And then I looked and I'm like, there's no freaking trophy for the survey. Like there, and then I was like, okay, well, surely these ruined settlements, or, these old houses or whatever, where you go and get the ornaments, like surely that's one. And so I did 2 or 3 of them. I was like, wait a minute. And so I went and looked and I was like, okay, well, this doesn't either. So like at that point, I still like them and I like the puzzle aspect of them. But I was like, since I knew the Spoilercast was coming up, I was like, I'm gonna focus on the things that I know are trophies so that I can get the platinum by the time this is recorded. So I was a little disappointed in that. And there were things I was doing to try to get trophies, and I was like, oh, this isn't a trophy. So my approach is a little different on trophies in general. But as someone who's not a trophy pursuer, a trophy master, I was still a little disappointed. I'm like, well, this seems like what should be a platinum. I don't know.
Yeah, like I'm looking at them now, and some of them are fine, like player level 20, 30, 50, that's all fine. Reaching certain places, finding Ether and Poseidon and Demeter and all of that. That's all fine. And then doing some key side quests like the stuff with Zoe and the land gods, Catalo with his arm. But then there's a lot of weird ones, and I didn't really understand what they were trying to, I guess, portray with some of these. Like completed 2 flying mount quests. 2 gauntlet races,
right?
Complete a set of salvage contracts, complete 4 rebel outposts, complete 3 relic runes, complete 1 arena challenge, play strike twice. It's like, okay. And some of them I thought were a little weird too, just from like stealth kill 10 machines. I think I got that in like 5 seconds.
Right.
and knock off 100 components. I remember that. I'm like, 100 components, like this
Yeah.
should literally be 10,000 components or something to make it
Right.
even remotely interesting. But whatever. I know that doesn't matter to a lot of people, but it does matter to me. It matters less to Ben. I did want to bring it up. Thank you for writing in about that, though. But let's Mackenzie, you're the one who wrote in about that, but let's jump. We haven't really talked about the way the game looks, and I think we should start with the mode we played in. Bruno Mohayo wrote in and said, or Moyaho, Moyah. I've never seen that. What's up, fellas? Did you play the games in performance or resolution mode? I played in resolution mode because the visual downgrade was just too significant for me, and I don't mind 30 frames for a game that is so visually stunning. Would love to hear your thoughts. Oh, no, I played on performance mode. I'm a performance mode believer now, thanks to Chris and Dustin and their influence. And, of course, the influence of both PlayStation 5 and these OLEDs I have in my house. It's just, you got to take advantage of all these things. They're just beautiful. I thought the game looked stunning even in 60 frames. I didn't even look at how it looked in the other form. It must have been absolutely mind-blowing. But that's how I played it. How did you play?
I played, so the first hour, and this is what I typically do with these games that have the option. The first hour I played in resolution mode, and then basically once you get out of that initial area where you go down the big, I can't even say the name of it, the trolley that takes you down the hill.
Right.
Once you get out of that and you really started moving around more and doing more combat related stuff, then I switched it to performance mode because I've been playing PC games long enough that it's hard for me to play 30 FPS. No matter how good it looks. But it looked amazing, for sure. It looked amazing in performance mode, too. So I don't feel like I missed anything by that.
It's funny because I'm having real technical issues. Well, not issues, but they're just in Elden Ring. And again, PlayStation 5 has just shown to me, and I think this is true. This is true for you. You had a horrible experience with Returnal, for instance. That it seems like
I wanted to call out that guy earlier that said he enjoyed the Returnal spoiler cast. I don't know if he was spoiling, trolling me or not, but people know good and well I didn't get to be on that Returnal spoiler cast.
Maybe he was talking. I don't even remember doing that, but I did want to note. So I want to note that I know that a lot of people are not having any issues. I'm having like tremendous issues with Elden Ring, where I'm like using my horse and turning around and everything's just popping in and shit. And I'm like, what the fuck is going on here? And I know some people, like we said earlier, were having maybe similar issues with Horizon, but I found it's funny you said the frame rate stuff. Like I'm not savant at all, like with that stuff. Like I used to make fun of frame rate savants, but I'm noticing it.
Yeah.
And so when I'm playing Elden Ring, I'm like, this isn't running at 60 frames a second.
Right.
And I'm becoming sensitive to it. So it's almost like Horizon is so fast that it's the only option. Although you're slowing down combat quite a bit.
Sure.
As well. But thank you for writing in, Bruno, about that. All right. Let's talk about this open world a little bit. And we talked about the geographic diversity of it. It's beautiful. Tyler Floyd wrote in and said, hey guys, Horizon Forbidden West has one of the best open worlds I've ever experienced. And a key factor in that is biome and machine diversity. Stop using that word biome. It's amazing to go from a snowy mountaintop to a jungle into a desert and then over to a beach and all in a short time. This also allows for excuses to have a plethora of different machines related to each, from monkeys and crocodiles to giant snakes. How does this open world rank for you when compared to others? So I was totally impressed with this, and I wanted to revisit this idea I had, as I said earlier, of this idea of kind of using your imagination even in an open world. When you're on an overworld in a role-playing game like Final Fantasy VI or whatever, Final Fantasy VII, you imagine that you're traveling roads and going over bridges and through forests and all this stuff, and it's not a one-to-one representation of your experience, but rather kind of showing you as you're going. And when you're in a town, there's not just really 5 houses in the town. There's a lot more. You're kind of just using your imagination a little bit. I feel like this game kind of has a similar feeling because you can quick travel, and it's so fluid and awesome. And I love the quick travel system in this game. It's just wonderful. But you're going from biome, as he said, to biome, location to location, snow to sand to salt, and sea and all of these different things. I especially love the salt flats. That was like my favorite part of the game. We'll talk about that later. And I feel like it's not quite one-to-one, and it requires you just to use a little bit of imagination. Like, this is the Rocky Mountains, this is Nevada, and this is the Bay Area, like when you start seeing redwoods and all that. And I like how it's truncated, but it still feels really big. Like the world felt really realized. And I also enjoy the diversity, and I couldn't believe how much is going on screen or how much the game remembers. The the
Hmm.
footprints through the snow and through the sand, all the
Yeah,
particle effects,
yeah.
constant pollen and movement. And the one thing I'll say aesthetically that I thought was a little weird was I feel like it feels a little supernatural. As I said on Sacred Symbols, it reminds me a little bit of Kingdoms of Amalur for some reason, like because it looks kind of recognizable, but then there's like this weird plant, and
Hmm.
you're like, what is this? Or there's this weird sign or this weird language, and I'm like, this feels supernatural or weird or magical. So it's like maybe the pastels and it's a little too bright, it's a little too orange and a little too blue, but maybe I'm also adjusting to the realities of OLED
Yeah.
4K, realities here and playing games. But I'm curious what you thought of the open world and the diversity and going, like you said, from jungle to desert to beach and all the rest, snow, etc.
I did really like. I liked all of that. I thought it was great. I thought that the diversity in the different areas was really cool. I mentioned earlier that I felt like sometimes in a particular zone, I was like, that exact rock formation was over there and over there and over there. So like that part of it, well, but I understand you got to reuse assets, otherwise you'll work on the game for 10 years before you put it out. So I understand that to an extent. I didn't feel like it was egregious or anything. The only thing I'll say, and I agree with you that like, yeah, it's got to be truncated, and yeah, we know that there's been some sea rise levels, and we know that there's some erosion in this area and stuff like that. But there were times where it took me a little bit out of it, particularly, and I'll talk about this later. But when you go to Vegas, and I'm like, well, Vegas is only like a 10-minute walk from Los Angeles or from San Francisco. Like that's not right.
Yeah, that
But so
doesn't make any
like
sense. Yeah.
I understand you have to truncate that stuff because otherwise there's no chance you could make a map that gigantic. But it did take me out of it a little bit when I realized like, oh well, I just walked half the distance of the United States in like 25 minutes. But everything I saw along there, this is more to the point of the question, everything I saw along those paths, everything that I interacted with in between was amazing. Like it was just really cool to see, like you said, going from sand to snow to mountain to water to whatever in between, or city or whatever. And I thought that the design of making places that were clearly what they were supposed to be was kind of masterful. There were times where I would be in an area and I was like, "Oh, this is XYZ. I'm in this area now," and I didn't even realize I was on that part of the map. And like, it's a part it's distant, but it's recognizable as what it is. And I thought that was intriguing.
Yeah, it's cool. They managed it well. I'm still of the mind that I'd prefer open worlds that are more one to one.
Hmm.
Like I think about even a game like Dead Rising being in a mall. Like that's kind of cool. That's a
Hmm.
cool open world. Or
Yeah.
old Grand Theft Auto games in these small cities. Days Gone in rural Oregon. But yeah, for what this was, I thought it was really well done. The diversity is cool. And we have actually a related question from Christian Brown who says, hello, gentlemen. What was your favorite real world location in the game? As someone who recently visited Zion and Yosemite, seeing them in game was really cool. I loved matching up photos I took with landscapes there. Since Colin spent many years in San Francisco, I imagine he especially might have some insight there. Thanks, boys. Yeah, it's interesting. In fact, the Transamerica building is a main attraction in this game, and
Hmm.
that's obviously that was at one time, not so much anymore, the most famous building in San Francisco. Yeah, it got me a little bit into the nostalgia feels
Yeah.
being in San Francisco and noticing some of those places. And I'm glad that you brought up the change in the environment as well. The coastlines are different, and I like how they never. First of all, they wouldn't know. Maybe Silence
Right.
would know,
Right.
but they wouldn't have any. They wouldn't have any knowledge of this. But when you see maps of the land, it's clear that like erosion, Long Island's gone. Florida's totally. It's like an archipelago now. The California, there's like a seed there,
Hmm.
and all of the rest. Baja California is all thinned out, etc. And I really liked that too. And so it just suggests that there's so much different, and there's still some sort of climactic difference between the north and
Yeah.
the south, but it's changed,
Yeah.
which I thought was pretty neat. But
Yeah.
to Christian's question, I guess I'm curious what your favorite location was. Mine, as I said earlier, where I'm pretty sure it was supposed to be the Bonneville salt flats that you
Yeah.
come across at some point, and I have always been fascinated by those. And just that's where they obviously do a lot of cool like experimental racing and all of that stuff. And
Sure.
but but it was just cool to see that. It just seemed like a real nice attention to detail, and I continue to be really impressed by. They're a Dutch studio. They have a lot of
Yeah.
different talent from all around the world, including American talent. But there's a nice touch of reality here as well.
Hmm.
So I like that. Do you have any real world location, or locations that stood out to you?
Yeah, for me, it was definitely the Vegas location. It was just cool first of all, to see it and to see like what their imagination of what it would look like in 1,000 years was. But really, I think the reason I like that area so much is it was just the most. And I think this was what Dustin was alluding to on the show that came out yesterday or today that I edited last night. Was talking about Vegas and how it was just a cool environment. How after you completed the mission for those guys, went down and turned everything back on, the whole place is lit up and part of it's underwater and part of it's not. Like, I just thought that design was, everything in the game is different, but that part of it was just kind of rose above for me and kind of exceeded those expectations I had for environmental storytelling, because there's things there like, the mini Eiffel Tower is there. And it's like,
Right.
well, that's not what that should look like. There's clearly a story on how it got to look like that. So just that storytelling through the environment, rather than just like, here's exactly what happened. Like that was more meaningful to me than I think having it spelled out directly would have been.
It's also cool to just see 1,000-year reclaimed stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We don't really, I think I said this with The Last of Us, we don't really know how quickly things would diminish in a road when we just stop taking care of them.
Mm-hmm.
And 1,000 years is a totally different story.
Yeah.
And excuse me. And I was riveted by just coming across like a car, for instance, and it's just barely there anymore, or buildings that are just hanging on, and you would kind of tell yourself fictional stories about the amazing craftsmanship that went into this building that's somehow just hanging on for dear life. And it's cool to see that much life eroded away, and of course the mystery, which is more in Zero Dawn than in Forbidden West, but the mystery of the old ones and the interaction of this old society that they didn't understand, that's kind of blown apart with this. Like when you meet Silence and now you meet other people with focuses and all of this, it's kind of different. But yeah, that naturalism I think is really cool too. Mo wrote in and said, "Hey Colin and Ben, I hope all is going well with you today. Just wondering how you feel about the map and world design in this game, and if you think you'd be able to navigate it organically. With all the praise that Elden Ring has been receiving for its lack of handholding and minimalist approach, lack of map icons, guiding markers, etc., I am wondering, do you think Horizon and other Ubisoft formula open world games would have benefited from having a default mode that the player could select that had all these things deactivated from the get-go, rather than having the player going in and manually turning them off? Or do you think that it wouldn't work for a game like Horizon because this game would have needed to be designed from the ground up with a minimalist presentation in mind?" Thanks, Mo, for writing in. This is an interesting philosophical and academic question about game design. And I never wanted Elden Ring to be anything other than what it is, because I know it's a game that people really love as it is. But for me, for my personal take, I need a little more than what Elden Ring gives you. And it is interesting to have this facade over it, which they let you do in other ways, where you should be able to maybe interact or not interact with those guideposts, as it were, more at your leisure. And I kind of did some odds and ends in Horizon myself. I made it so that the markers on the screen were shown where I needed to go next for a quest, for instance, which you can turn off. But I played at normal difficulty and all of that. So there are different ways you can kind of massage that, but I like Horizon telling you what to do. Now, I know people make fun of it with the quest logs and all of this, but I really like that. I need that. And it's not that Elden Ring is vague that bothers me. It's that you don't even really know what you've done. Like I just come across this boss with a red energy bar. I fight him and he dies, and it says enemy dead. And I'm like, okay, like, so what does that mean? Like, is there any record that this happened? What does that tell me? That to me, it's weird that Elden Ring embraces being a game so much. And it does. And I love that. I think that's the coolest part about it, is it embraces that it's a video game, and then it says, but we don't want to give you the trappings of a video game. We're not that low class trash. I mean, that's almost the way it feels. And I feel like Horizon hits a nice mark. I feel like it's a little sub Ubisoft in terms of its stylized approach. But what do you think about the idea from Mo here about the organic navigation and maybe having that option? Would you have wanted to play like that?
Yeah, I think so. And to put a little light on it, I've only played maybe, I think I started it yesterday, so I've only played like 3 hours of Elden Ring. But so far, and
you're probably already further than I am.
No, I'm not. I know where you are, and I'm nowhere near there. I'm not a Souls veteran by any stretch of the imagination. So for me, it's a little tougher. Not necessarily the fights, but just like, I'm also someone who needs a little bit of guidance to be able to figure out where to go next, and I can adapt to that easily. But I will say that I would have liked the option. I know that in some Assassin's Creed games that I've played, and I haven't kept up with them in years, but they give you the option at the beginning, like, do you want this to be a guided or organic experience? I don't remember the phrasing they use, the terms, but and for me, I would have liked that option, but to be frank, I was at times a little annoyed at how much guidance there was being given both by the map and by Aloy, and I think we have that to talk about later, but I wasn't so annoyed that I went in to the settings to see if you could enable or disable any of that or customize it. It sounds like you can, but it was maybe annoyed is not even the right word, but I was like, wow, I wish that I only had right now on my screen places where I could find scrappers, or I only had on my screen uh, my next quest or whatever like that. And I did use the quest marking log, and it would tell you where to go once you selected that quest. But uh, so I'm kind of in between there. I kind of feel like I would have liked more options to turn stuff on the HUD off, but I didn't hate it so much that I went exploring on how to do that, or if there was a way to even do that.
Well, Mo, I think we'll have more granular options in future open world games as a rule. I think Elden Ring is going to be very influential, but I think it's going to take time for that to find its way through. And I'll argue that there are games that have kind of sort of played with this in the past, like Fallout's hardcore modes where you have to sleep and do all that kind of shit, is kind of playing with what people I think want more of. And I appreciate that, but I don't. All right, let's talk about characters. We'll start at the very top. Jim Capron wrote in and said, "Hey, SS crew, I wanted to know what you thought of Aloy's character development. I found her story of trying to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders to allow herself to ask others for help quite meaningful. I also really admired her bravery and determination, but also her empathy, particularly in the scenes with Beta and various characters in the side quests. In general, I'm really happy with the direction Guerilla took Aloy, and I'd go as far as to say she's one of my favorite characters in all video games, probably only behind Ellie from The Last of Us." Thank you, Jim, for writing in. So Aloy is pretty controversial. Even with people that like the game, Aloy is somewhat controversial. I like her. She seems real to me. She is treated by she's renowned and everyone knows who she is. And she's treated almost like a demigod. And with that comes this heavy burden of infinite expectations, people wanting something from you and you trying to help and kind of present yourself for what you need, and people always trying to get something out of you. And that's what the game's all about. I mean, just like the original Horizon, which is split between like the futuristic storyline and the current tribal storyline, it's the same thing in the second game.
Yeah.
And it's all about how these different tribes are using Aloy and befriending Aloy, and she's befriending them. I mean, it's not total use, but where they're using each other to kind of get the story moving forward. And I can understand that Aloy's not going to be all happy and giddy and go lucky. I mean, I don't really know. Similar to kind of some of the higher end, I guess, complaints about the game and its quality. I wonder with Aloy, I'm like, what the fuck do you want? It almost reminds me of that image making fun of Aloy where she's like a beautiful, I think she's beautiful, but where she's like got her makeup on and all that crazy shit. And it's like, it's so funny. It's like, is that what you want out of Aloy? I think Aloy seems perfectly normal and reasonable to me. So what do you think?
I would agree. And you probably have some feelings about this too, but I have a little bit more sympathy for her because, as a lot of people know, I used to be the mayor of my town, and I feel like at times I kind of felt like Aloy, where everybody wanted something from me, even though I was just trying to do this particular task, and I would stop to help them, and I wanted to help them, but I really had other things that I needed to do. And so I feel like that's where a lot of the bitchiness complaints come from about Aloy, is that like they're like, oh, she's so passive aggressive towards people when they ask for her help. I'm like, yeah, but she's helping them. Well, I mean, I guess that's up to you, the character, but like you're still helping them. You're still working through things with them. You're still ultimately caring for them, and you're clearly caring for them in some sense because you want to literally save the planet and humanity. So like I get it from that sense. I will say there was one part after I was kind of not externally, but I was internally defending her from all these, Twitter posts and Discord posts and stuff that I had seen about like, don't like Aloy's attitude. And I was like, she's fine. You guys are being oversensitive. And then she goes and destroys that wall at the one camp. And I was like, okay, that was kind of a bitch move. I'll agree with that. I'll agree with you there. But otherwise, no, I think she's a very likable character. I disagree with a lot of the discourse around her. There were other characters that I found much more grating than Aloy for sure. And at its core, I think that she's like a young woman who has literally the weight of the world on her shoulders and no real support system, right? She's got some friends who want to help, but a lot of them are incompetent. Like, she's going to have some issues, but overall, she still cares about people. And that is evident, not necessarily always in her facial expressions, but in her actions and in the things you're doing. And I feel like just discounting her as she's a little bitchy because she kind of sighed when somebody asked her to go help them remake their arm is, I don't know. I think that's shallow.
Yeah, I agree. I do note some people's consternation that she is interrupting the flow of the finality of the game,
Mm-hmm.
or the various things people are doing are not contingent on the urgency of her quest.
Right.
And maybe she should communicate that better. But I feel like she's kind of trying to balance that Aloy's always kind of been on a balance beam in her life. She was an outcast, and then she was welcomed in, but she wasn't trusted, and she didn't know who loved her and who didn't, and she lost her beloved father figure and all the rest. It's like, I don't know what, I think there's a lot of depth with her. And I also think the performances are really good, and the voice acting is really good as well.
Yeah.
And the performance, the person who performs her or is based on her is different than the voice actress, but right. I think it's all very good. It all ties up well. I like Aloy. I think she's an interesting character. I will say this, that I thought one thing was interesting. I feel like this is a plot hole because I don't think that they intended on doing this. They make Elizabeth Sobek a lesbian, right? She's a lesbian. She's with Tilda and they're like, they're a couple or whatever, right? In the previous world. And that's part of Tilda's insistence on kind of like betraying everyone to try to get, I guess, Elizabeth back somehow. But they don't make at least not yet overtly, if Aloy isn't gay, that's a plot hole, because aren't you born gay? I mean, I think you are. So wouldn't you just assume that all of the Aloy clones have to be gay? And then they kind of play with this idea of giving love interest. Like, I really liked how it was kind of, I was like, oh, Sun King Avad kind of has a thing for her. And I was like kind of hoping and praying and wishing that something was going to happen there. Just wanted to point that out, that I thought that was kind of interesting. And I don't think that was intentional, because it suggests sexuality as a choice, which seems not in line with both reality and with what would certainly be their politics. Did you see that or make that connection, or am I totally wrong on that?
I didn't make that connection, but now that you're pointing it out, I definitely see it. And I have a couple thoughts. One is that we don't know Aloy's sexual preference. I mean, she's clearly uninterested in staying at the king's palace overnight. Like, he asked her to overtly. Maybe he didn't mean it in a sexual fashion, I don't know, but like, she wasn't interested. And I feel like if there was some attraction there, maybe that would have been a different story. It's the end of the world. Hey, why not? Let's do it. But on the other side, I feel like there is an argument, and I don't know if I agree with it, I haven't actually thought about it, that there's a little bit of nature nurture in sexual preferences, because you don't really develop those feelings and emotions until you get to a certain age. Like, that part of your brain and your body isn't active yet. So whether or not that's the reality, and I don't really want to have a big long debate in the comments, because I'm not making a statement, I'm just giving
understand.
a perspective.
I think everyone understands.
Yeah. I mean, maybe Elizabeth is a lesbian, or she is a lesbian, but Aloy's upbringing either didn't I don't mean upbringing in like her parental structure, but I mean like the way she developed didn't lend her towards that. Or maybe she just is, it's unexpressed, in my opinion.
Well, it could be a propensity. Like, I would imagine, like, I have a propensity to be right-brained, but I imagine based on all sorts of elements that could have been different, that some left brain part of me would have come out in a different permutation. So I understand what you're saying completely. Yeah. Let's talk about some of these other characters. Brucey Thomas wrote in and said, "Hi, Colin and Ben. Just wanted to ask who your favorite character is outside of Aloy. I really enjoyed the writing and voice at work for Catalo, a character who was born and raised surrounded by violence, who worked his way through the ranks to become a marshal, only to be looked at as an outcast once he loses his arm. All this happening at the same time that he is coming to terms with the fact that all of the violence he has been taught needs to be left in the past if the world is to prosper in the future. Noshir Dalal really nails the quiet, festering anxiety of this character, trying to figure out who he is and who he wants to be. What say you?" I totally agree. I mean, this is a great pull. I like this character a lot too. I liked the development of their relationship when you go speak to him in between missions in the base, and and you go on that mission finally to help him with his arm and then test the arm. And I especially like that I really liked this point because I was thinking about it, and Guerilla was ahead of me with my thoughts, where I was like, oh, this is kind of going down an interesting path, because is it going to suggest that the armless man, or the man who lost his arm, should try to live a better life only with the second arm, or like that he can't get over it? And is it a bad message to send? Well, and I don't know if it's a bad or a good message, or if it even matters, but they were ahead of that. They nipped that in the bud, because he accepts that he doesn't really want it, and that he only uses it when he really has to. And I thought that was kind of cool. So I really liked him a lot. I liked the characters, Moreland and his crew, like the entertainers. I thought that they were pretty interesting. And I wanted to give a shout out as well to Tilda Vandermeer, who we'll talk about more specifically. I just think that that's a really fascinating, well acted character, and there's some others as well. So who stands out to you?
Catalo is also my number one pick for my favorite side character. And I think of all of the side characters that I did like, he was the one who was the least, the most relatable, I guess, in a sense. And not necessarily that I relate to not having an arm or something like that by any means, but I relate to him in the sense that, like, even though his attitude changes, his personality doesn't. Because at the beginning he's very distant towards Aloy. He doesn't really want anything to do with her. He thinks that it's a lost cause. He doesn't want to go back and do. And by the end, he's asking for her help and appreciating her. And I just liked seeing that character development. That I feel like a lot of the other characters, you don't get to see them go from A to Z like that so quickly. But while he's maintaining, while he's changing his perspective and his outlook and the way he sees the world, he's still kind of a grumpy guy. Like that part of him stays there, even though his attitude is actually changing. So I enjoyed that. I also, on a different kind of level, enjoyed Aaron a little bit. I felt like sometimes he was a bit corny, and sometimes the trope was a little bit played up. But I just found him a little bit charming. You can tell he deeply cares for Aloy. You can tell he deeply cares about the people around him, and that was just fun to see. It was charming, I think, but I think he was also a little annoying at points.
Yeah, I wanted to give a shout out as well to I liked Zoe. It was interesting, kind of seeing the triangulation between Zoe, Varl, and Arend, and the friendship, but also the romantic aspect between two of them, and all of that. That was interesting. And I got to give a shout out to Alva, who I'm not sure is the greatest character, but I really liked the Quen, and I liked this introduction of another tribe. I hope we get to see much more of them. I think it's suggested that I would assume they're Asian, of Chinese of some sort. Not that's what they are, in terms of their genetics or whatever, because it's a different, like, remade world. But it seems like that's kind of where they're coming from, and I really liked that. I thought that was, like, exciting and interesting. It would be so cool to see the Chinese ruins and the East Asian ruins in Japan and all the Korea and all of these places, and the way they look now and what they've been dealing with over these last 1,000 years. Yeah, I hope so. That would be awesome.
Yeah,
I think that would be really cool.
What did you think about Zoe and Varl's? I guess this kind of falls into this, like, their relationship. I felt like it was fine. I was totally fine with the way their relationship formed, but I felt like, maybe I'm wrong here, but like Varl went very quickly. Like I felt like he was interested in Aloy in more than just a friendship way. Maybe I'm wrong, but then he switched so quickly to being into Zoe, and maybe my timeline's just messed up. It seems like a very small amount of time passed between when he and Zoe became an item and when she revealed she was pregnant. Like, I feel like that was, I don't know, maybe that's just an inconsistency, or just like the map is smaller, time is condensed. I don't know, but I felt like that whole timeline of them going from not even knowing each other to she's pregnant and knows it was pretty quick.
Yeah, you're right. It could be a suggested truncation of time for all we know.
Yeah,
they don't really say one way or the other in terms of, like, I think they might imply like weeks pass here and there,
right?
But it's not like Last of Us where it's seasons, or like very literal, like this is now 3 months later, or et cetera and so on. So now I wanted to ask you this. I don't mean to offend anyone about this, so stand down, but I'm happy to bring this up, or I'm more confident bringing this up, because when I Googled it, and I'll tell you what I Googled, this character came up, and I was curious if I was just reading it wrong, and I don't think that I am reading it right, but I just Googled Horizon Forbidden West Down syndrome, and Alva comes up when I search for that. And I
Mm.
was looking at her and trying to kind of listen to her and figure it out. I was like, is she supposed to have Downs, or is it just like a weird model? Because I wouldn't be surprised if that was the
Mm.
case. I feel like we would have heard more about that. But did you get that vibe at all? Because I wrote that in my notes. I'm like, does she have Down syndrome? Like,
Mm.
in some way, she kind of has that Down syndrome aesthetic, and
Mm-hmm.
also like a kind of I don't even know how to put it properly, like a not entire grasp of the reality of the world, but very
Sure.
hyper focused on what she knows and
Right.
understands. And in Googling that, I was like, someone else has searched for this and like made these AI connections that are connecting these two characters. So I'm not the only person
Right.
that saw it,
Yeah.
but I don't know. Am I crazy in that assumption?
I don't think you're crazy. I think you could be right. I did not get that impression. The impressions I did get, I mean, I didn't get the specifically with the Down syndrome impression. What I did get was I actually thought that she may have a mild case of Asperger's or something similar, where
Hmm.
she's very, very high functioning and very intellectual, but kind of detached in other
Maybe
ways.
that's it. Maybe I'm not using the proper language. Yeah, something. Yeah,
Yeah.
something. Yeah.
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 So I think
Because so you picked that up too, though.
I did. I definitely thought she was different, and I thought that that was done in a, if that was their intention, was done in a way that wasn't like, hey, look, this character's different for difference sake, but it was very much like, here are the advantages and disadvantages of this person's personality, and we're representing something different than everybody else in the game. And I thought that was neat, but I didn't. Yeah, I don't know that I spent a whole lot of time thinking about it, but it did cross my mind for sure.
Yeah, I just wondered that. I like what I liked about her character too is this idea of she's having access to like a more primitive
Yep.
focus,
Hmm.
which I thought was pretty neat. And we'll get more
Yeah.
into the implications of that later. But
Sure.
let's talk about some of these actors as well and talk them up. Ryan Daly wrote in and said, "Hey fellas, were either of you disappointed in the lack of FaceTime some of the big enemies got? I was very excited to see Carrie Ann Moss and Angela Bassett cast in roles, but it was a bit disappointed they didn't get to flex their acting chops more throughout the game. Thanks for all you do, especially these Spoilercast supplements." Thank you, Ryan, for writing in. I actually had a look. I was like, Angela Bassett is in Horizon. Who is she? And she's Regala, but you barely even hear
Right.
Regala. Regala's not
Yeah.
especially a compelling character. I was like, wow, that's a big get.
Yeah.
And of course, Carrie Ann Moss does a great job. But how did you feel about the performances? Did you want to know the villains more? There are quite a few of them, as Silence kind of occupies that gray area. But then there's like kind of a villain of the day in regards to the various tribes you're fighting, and then there are
Right.
the Far Zeniths. So what did you make of that?
Yeah. So briefly on Silence, I was disappointed that he wasn't in the game more. For sure, he's probably, if I had to like rank all my characters, he's probably like my third favorite after the others I mentioned, just because I love the morally gray unknown. But anyway, I think his performance is excellent. Carrie Ann Moss, the moment I heard her voice, I knew who it was. I've seen her in enough stuff, especially The Matrix, 9 million times, that I knew 100% who it was. I did not know who Angela Bassett played until I looked it up as well. I felt like I agree. Bassett's character was not in the game enough for me to really feel one way or another about it. I felt like they did the stereotypical villain thing. Motivations were laid out and they didn't stray from them. And sometimes that's okay. You don't stray from your motivations all the time. But I was a little, I don't know if I was disappointed, but I was underwhelmed with that performance. Carrie Ann Moss, every time she was on the screen, I was hooked. I mean, I was stuck to it, and not just because it was Carrie Ann Moss, but because I found that character and the way that they were enveloping the storyline when she was present, was phenomenal. I'm not an expert on the type of performances that actors in video games have to do, but it seems like she hasn't nailed. And I don't know that she's been in many other games. Maybe she has. I just don't know.
Well, since we're bringing up Tilda and these other characters, we might as well just dive into them now. We haven't even talked about the gameplay yet, which we will absolutely do. But
Mm-hmm.
Philip McD wrote in and said, "Hello, my dudes. I hope all is well. What did you think of Tilda's art collection section right after she saves Aloy? I exhausted every bit of dialogue in that section because I found the way Tilda described the art was so enlightening with the insights given by Tilda and the questions Aloy asked. I think Guerrilla really did a great job of making you care and think more deeply about analyzing art. It was probably my favorite moment from the game. Next time I go to an art museum, I may spend more time trying to puzzle out what the artist is trying to convey with their artwork. I also exhausted all of the stuff there as well, which I do in most games everywhere that I possibly go. So I guess it's not that unusual, but I love going to art museums. It's actually something I really enjoy. My brother and one of my sisters are both artists, and my sister-in-law is a fine artist too. So we have some connection. My cousin, my grandfather were fine artists. So I don't have that at all. I can't draw shit. I can't paint shit. I can't visually represent anything. But I've always really enjoyed that, and I really enjoyed that section. It was a nice kind of reprieve. The entire scene with Tilda and Aloy at the table in the AI kind of, or in the VR rather situation was, I thought, super neat. And here's what I'll say about Tilda's art collection is that I feel like Tilda Vandermeer, the art section, and a few other things are direct odes in a direct reference to the Netherlands, and this is where Guerilla is. And I feel like that's not a coincidence. They are celebrating specifically Dutch masters in that art piece, like in that art section, like Vermeer and others. And Tilda Vandermeer's character is from the Netherlands before the world ends, and Guerilla is located in the Netherlands, mostly staffed by Dutch people. So I had to make that connection as well. I think that is clear. But what did you make about the art section and the celebration of that, and kind of the slowing down of the story there? I really enjoy. I got enthralled by that section. It was happening right when I was going to go to bed one night, and I was just up like watching and exploring all the different angles.
Yeah, I admittedly didn't make the Dutch connection, but that shines more light on it now for sure. I enjoy that. I also enjoy art. I like learning more about it. I'm not a big abstract art person. Of course, that's not what any of this stuff was, but like I really enjoy, the humanities type things that you would study. I enjoy that era of art. The thing I took most from it, well, first of all, I didn't love the fact that as she was explaining it all to Aloy, and of course Aloy would have no idea about any of this stuff or why it's important or anything, but as she was explaining it, which I liked, I didn't like the fact that it was like a voice in another room. I felt like having her there to like express her feelings for these things, and having her there like, showing different things in the paintings would have been really interesting. Having her just over basically a speaker coming into the room was a bit different. But the thing I took most from those art sections is that even though Tilda is, or at one point was, whether she's changed or not, a vain, conceited, selfish person who literally left the planet to abandon it, before she left, she cared so much about these things that they were locked away in a place that clearly was not exposed and was secure enough to be fine. But that when she came back, it was enough of a focus for her enough of like still a point of pride, a thing to be remembered, that she wanted to expose Aloy to it. And so like that part of it, not just the fact that she was an enjoyer of art, but just the fact that she had a little bit of care for the past still, even though she's so far in the future and so basically above the past, that she still had that care. That added more of a dimension to her character than I think even just the dialogue with her and the expression did. So I don't know if that's the purpose they meant for it to serve, but that's the purpose it served to me, at least.
Yeah, it was interesting. It felt intimate and grounding, and I liked that, especially because Far Zenith kind of stretches the imagination a little bit. We were talking about silence too, and I want to come back to him with this question from Deutschbag. Nice name. It says, "Hey Colin, one theme in Forbidden West is scientific versus religious explanation. Because of her focus, Aloy often has insight into the true causes of things, but her way of looking at the world isn't necessarily better. It's just a different way. My favorite scenes in both Horizon games are always ones that emphasize the deep harmony between religion and science. For example, when the Utaru's land gods visit cauldrons annually, Aloy knows that they're going there to be repaired by automated robotic systems. But from the perspective of the Utaru, it's a ceremonial changing of the seasons and a time for them to reflect and give thanks for the land gods' role in agriculture. I would actually argue that the Utaru's explanation is just as accurate as Aloy's. The problem I have with the game then is that while tons of religious characters like Zoe gain an appreciation for Aloy's way of looking at things, Aloy never really gains much appreciation for theirs. What do you think?" Silence is a character that I'm surprised you didn't bring up here as well, and because he reminds me of this the most. We understand Silence to be the first person to discover a focus like
Hmm.
of the new breed that we know of. And he at least is the first person to discover one and understand what he is seeing and doing, and he
Hmm.
becomes immersed and obsessed with the old ones. And I think that that is makes him so interesting in the way that that straddles the fact that he knows that everyone around him, he's the first one to know, in other words, that everyone around him are ignorant of
Hmm.
everything that's going on. He doesn't know the answers either, but he knows that the answers that they know are not real. And I like that the Yutaru reference is great because that is the understanding of the and by the way, how Aloy knows that she can like pop that piece off of them and when one of them is under ill repair. So I like the tension between science and religion, and I think it is interesting. My sense though about what Aloy's situation is this: we know that anthropologically, religion comes forward, during times probably before animal husbandry and agriculture, when things are a little calmer and they understand nature a little bit better, and they understand maybe they can wield fire and they can protect themselves at night, and they can study the stars, and maybe they have a little bit of a food surplus, and they can speak to each other, and maybe they have some really crude communications with writing and pre-Sanskrit kind of nonsense. But I feel like religion comes when you have nothing, or no, I shouldn't say nothing. Religion comes when you don't have to work for survival anymore. Religion comes when you can dedicate a priest that doesn't have to sow food, who can be fed by those who sow food, so he can divine things in the stars and all of that. And so if you kind of take that logical explanation, which I do, then Aloy just doesn't have time for this because she knows that regardless of what they believe, this imminent threat is coming to them nonetheless.
Hmm.
And what I love about this is, and this is what I think is kind of the brilliance about Horizon's writing, is that Nemesis sends the signal in Zero Dawn to Hades. That's where the signal comes from. So
Hmm.
this was all kind of planned from the beginning, indicating that the Far Zenith storyline and all of that was intended from the beginning. And in fact, someone wrote in saying that John Gonzalez, who was the writer of the original game, claims credit for all the Far Zenith parts of the new one. So there is this intentional tension between science and far science, sci-fi. What we would look
Yeah.
at is far sci-fi, and then real religious roots. And what I find interesting about the religious stuff too is just that they rediscover the same questions and answers that any religious group is looking to discover and find in their own way. So I've said a lot, but what do you think about this tension, whether it's through the Utaru or through Silence and others?
Yeah. I was a little, I guess, put off by the way that Aloy, and I guess by extension Guerilla, kind of treated some of these characters because um, whether you're religious or not, or you believe a certain way or not, like it doesn't mean people who do the opposite are necessarily ignorant. And I felt like my biggest issue with it all was not that they showed that the science or the reality of things is different or better than the religion. It's that in every instance where someone in the game was religious or expressing a belief or something like that, they were made to look like a fool. And while I understand that in these specific situations they were being foolish because or they were just unaware, they were ignorant of the reality, um, it kind of superseded the game's story for me, and that it was like, well, are they just trying to make a point here? Are they trying to cast like? And I think there's a lot of philosophical points in this game, but it almost felt like, well, anything faith based is wrong always, and you should be, and it like made them look stupid instead of just like being more enlightened, I guess I could say. So I guess I had a little bit of a sense with that, and it felt to me like and it felt to me like Aloy, she was raised in one of these tribes, right? And I don't know, they don't go into her backstory about what she believed and everything like that, but you have to imagine it's only been a little while since she really got out of that religious aspect. And it kind of reminded me, I actually told my wife this while I was playing. It reminded me of a phrase that certain sects of Christianity use when someone becomes a new convert. They say they're in cage stage because they're so ambitious about going out and telling everyone everything that they need to be locked in a cage because they're just going to hurt the mission more than they're going to help it. And it kind of felt like Aloy almost was in a cage stage where she was just like intent on telling everyone that everything they believed was wrong. And I don't know, that kind of struck me funny, but I like the disparity between. I like that they show that there's these tribes with these thoughts and these and everything like that and these beliefs, but the way that they were just made, not that they were wrong, it's fine to be wrong, but the way that they were made to almost look foolish was a little unsettling to me. Not unsettling, just a little bit distasteful to me. Even though they were clearly wrong, it was still kind of like they showed them to be idiots rather than just not learned.
Yeah, that's interesting. Especially with the limits of what they could know
Right.
in this new reality. So yeah,
Right.
I think you're right.
Yep.
All right. One more question I want to ask you about characters before we'll finally talk about playing the game itself. Neo JD wrote in and said, what did you guys think about the decision to kill off Varl? Did you see it coming? Did you enjoy this character? Personally, I took it harder than I thought. I figured a death was coming, but I thought it'd be beta because they already had Aloy. In addition, I figured if we were ever going to add co-op, that the other character would be player would be Varl, kind of like in a Miles Morales learning from Peter Parker type of way. I don't know. You're talking about like kind of this writing disrespect, and I feel like Varl's character was written in this game in such a way as to be annoying.
Yeah.
And so you don't want anyone to die per se, but it's like, I don't know, Varl, okay. I would have been more upset if anyone else in your core party had died than him. But it's not because, like, I like the idea of this loyalist, like this obsessive loyalist. He's not in love with Aloy. Like, he doesn't have a thing for her. And it's insinuated that he does. And I really like that. It's like, no, he's just like really he's like an apostle of this person and is just all about this person and wants to do anything he can to help her. But it comes off as desperate and annoying in this game, which I feel like when he dies, I'm like, eh. And I think the only reason that they wrote it like that was because the death happens and they want it to be like, well, Aloy, you shouldn't have been so dismissive of Varl. And Varl, she's trying to constantly get away from him. It reminds me of the No Doubt song Spiderwebs a little bit. It's like, just always trying to dodge this guy, but it's not romantic. It's just obsessive.
Yeah.
How do you feel about Varl and his death?
Yeah, I'm pretty much aligned there too. I didn't really make the connection that that's why they were making him so annoying, is so that it would make more of an impact when he died, but that makes a lot of sense. Unfortunately for me, so it wasn't intentional. Somebody in the Discord was talking about another media outlet's perspective on Varl and a political aspect of it, and they posted in the politics channel, which is sometimes a crazy place in our Discord. They posted, what do you guys think about Varl's death in relation to what this person on this other podcast said? And I immediately was like, shit. Like, I hadn't gotten to that point yet. I was like maybe 10 hours in on the game. So that part of the drama was taken out for me. So I can't really react on how it actually made me feel because I knew it was coming. But as far as the character, and maybe it's because I knew he was going to be gone soon, but I just kind of dismissed him. So unfortunately, I can't provide a real solid feedback on that because, and like I said, it was unintentional. They didn't mean to spoil it. That kind of stuff doesn't normally happen in the Discord, but this was just an unfortunate coincidence. And I happened to be one of like 3 people who saw it, fortunately. So it wasn't a big deal, but I'm not trying to discourage people from coming to the Discord is what I'm getting at. But yeah, it was disappointing because it could have been a character I really enjoyed, or maybe it was a character I was going to hate, but either way, it didn't matter because I knew they were going to die.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about play. And let's start with Mighty Max, who wrote into us and said, hey, boys, I'd like it if you spoke a bit about your preferred play styles. Which tech tree did you go for first and why? I love having animal companions in games and even in fantasy novels, and the idea of converting machines to fight for me and with me was always something I liked about a lot about Horizon games. I'm sorry. Traps and hunters were also very big in how I built my Aloy. What was your favorite Valor Surge? I picked the shield one for most of the game for the tougher fights and then used the power shot to help me through the final chapter. Eager to hear what your favorite build ended up being. So it's interesting because I guess this goes into a complaint I have, maybe my most significant complaint about the game, which is there's a balance issue in this game. It becomes, in my opinion, it becomes too easy and it becomes too arbitrary. It's weird that the final mission's level recommendation is 35.
Yeah.
I did everything in the game. I got there at level 50, which is the cap, after probably another 20 hours of not leveling because I was at the cap. And so the game never, and I say this a lot. I say this about a lot of games. Like I say this about fighting games. A fighting game is a perfect game to force you to react. The game does something and you react. And if you don't do anything to it, if you get frustrated with it, and if you don't react, it's just going to continue to beat the shit out of you. Yeah. And so you learn to do something else. And then that is figured out and you learn to do something else and you combo them together and you have to act wily and trick the player. But in Horizon, they give you all these options. They give you these various weapons, but they never give you any reason to use them. And so I just used bow and arrow the entire time. And, of course, my staff sometimes, like for melee, but I only used the extraneous weapons when the game forced me to do it, whether it was in one of the arena combat situations or
Hunting
in one of the
grounds.
training sessions
Yeah.
as well. So I just stuck with my arrows, and I'll say my playstyle kind of enhanced maybe halfway through the game when I finally fully embraced the use of arrows that were not just like impact arrows to break armor off, but using arrows to light things on fire and poison them and do or whatever, rust them out. So I played a very aggressive style, but I played only with the bow and arrow, and I like the backstab as well and get involved with that.
Yeah.
But I didn't take over many machines. I took them over just for the trophy, basically. I very similar to other games, like it reminds me of Rainbow Six 3 when I would. Oh no, yeah, it was Rainbow Six 3 when I would play the campaign of that on Xbox by myself. I would kill my teammates in the beginning of every map and just play the map by myself.
Yeah.
And I feel like that about the animal companions, where it was cool that you can take them over and deploy them on your behalf or have them act in a more defensive manner, but it's not really something that I cared too deeply to explore. So it was really just me, Aloy, the bow and arrow, various arrows, hunting bow, hunter bows, and that was basically it. How did you play?
So I maxed out before I unlocked anything else. I maxed out the warrior tree, and this comes from. I don't normally do that. I'll usually try to spread things around, but this just comes from. In the past, I've noticed that like if I have a tree maxed out, it's OP by the the point that it's maxed out over everything else. So I maxed out, and also the reason I picked warrior wasn't because I liked the warrior one. It was just because it was the one on the left, and that's how my brain works. So I just went for one tree solely, and it was a combat tree, and maxed it out and everything. I agree with you as far as I tended not to like. I hardly ever used any traps. There was one time where I took over a machine and just wanted to play around, so I set traps around them and then ran off and shot them while I had them taken over just to watch them explode, because I'm Sid from Toy Story apparently. But other than that, I would scan a machine. The first time I ever encountered a certain machine of a type, I would scan it, find out where its weak points were, shoot tons of arrows into it, and then melee it to death pretty much. I mean, unfortunately for me, the combat was really good at the beginning and kind of boring by the end because the tougher machines, I don't remember what they were called, but the spears you could throw that would explode.
Oh yeah, I don't remember those. I never even used those. Yeah.
I don't remember names for anything, but the spears you could throw to explode were just insane, and I had them all the way maxed up. So if there was a machine I just couldn't take down with regular arrows or even the special arrows, I would just throw one of those at it a couple times, blow off some components, and then take it down. So I really enjoyed, like, if I would run into one of those fields with the elk or deer looking machines, whatever they were called again,
Longhorns or whatever.
Longhorns, the antler ones. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, something like that.
I would just run into the middle of a pack of those and start swinging my staff around and just destroy them as fast as possible. I felt like I would have liked a little bit more of a tactical reason to explore all of those, like you were saying, to use the bombs that you could make to have them available for use all the time. I did have them available for use all the time because I almost never used any of them except for in maybe a very few specific instances. So, yeah, it was that. I enjoyed the gameplay. I love just swinging that staff around and smacking stuff with it, but it wasn't necessarily challenging or satisfying in that respect.
It's funny. I'm glad you first of all remember to mention the skill tree. I managed to level everything up maximally except for I basically ran out of steam with the machine master stuff. Yeah. But I actually went with survivor and hunter first because I love the concentration, the deep concentration, all of that kind of stuff, and then the potion proficiency and all of that. But you can basically slow the game down to a complete crawl and keep it there.
After I maxed out warrior, that's what I did next. Yeah, because I realized that was an important factor.
I loved that, and then I would just be picking just pieces of these machines off over and over again. I must say, and I think it just speaks to how I like to play games, very much like I love to play The Division and all of this. I was just really enjoying the fluidity and the cycle of the combat and just picking these things off. And they're not being, and I bring up The Division because it's like you're not really in danger, especially later in the game. It's very rare for you to die. It's more that you're just in it for the thrill of the combat to see what you can get off of these different creatures and all the rest. But I wanted to ask you about this one thing that I'm so glad someone wrote in about, because it's something that came up to me as well when I was playing. Matt Sloan wrote in, said, "Hi, Colin and Ben. Just a quick question. Did you ever feel attached or emotionally invested to any of the robots? I didn't until I came across the land gods. Seeing them suffer, I really wanted to help them get better and fixed. I felt this emotionality myself, Ben, with just some of the more helpless creatures. Like towards the end of the game, when you're going against the longhorn type creatures, whatever, like the more grazy creatures that don't even really want to attack you, and you're just fucking obliterating these things. Like you shoot one of your hunter arrows into its back little canister, and the whole thing just back in the beginning of the game, it would like, pop off or do a little damage, and you'd have to kind of fight it and engage it. And then at the end, you're just obliterating it with one hit. And I kind of did feel a sensitivity to it because the machines are not sentient. They're not victims per se, but they don't know what they're doing. They don't know that they're bad. They were created to do all of these different tasks. And the entire situation with Hades and Gaia has been totally screwed up, and they're just kind of going about their business. I mean, I remember when we found the tall neck in one of the cauldrons.
Yeah.
It was a little emotional because it's like, wow, how long has this thing just been stuck like this?
Mm-hmm.
And even though it doesn't know any better, we do, and we know the passage of time and the sadness of things passing and all that. So I found that to be super interesting. I'm curious what you make of that, of the emotionality of the robots.
I didn't give a shit about the robots' feelings, honestly, if I'm just being real. It didn't bother me at all. I knew they were robots. I knew where they were getting made, all that kind of stuff. It actually bothered me more, and not bothered me actually, but when you have to go, there was a couple times I had to actually go out and kill animals, not just for meat, but for like actual animals. For you need to upgrade your pouch or whatever, and I was like, oh, this breed of pig has existed for 1,000 years past the end of humanity, and here I am killing it with one arrow from 100 yards away. Like that kind of felt a little cheap. I don't know. But no, as far as the machines, like I will agree that tall neck at the end, I was like, oh man, I wonder how long that's been here. But most of the machines are, I don't know, they're coming after you. I don't have I didn't have any problem destroying them and tearing them all their pieces off and using them for my own purposes.
It's a projection of human values on, again, robots that do not know what they're doing.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because they work for conflicting sides. And, we see with Regala and her tribe, I love how they're able to take them over. And because people used to be so impressed by Aoi riding a creature's back, which is why I love the Sunwing part, which we'll talk about in a moment. But
I think if they had been evil actual animals instead of literal robots, like if the animals had been taken in the exact same way, but they'd been taken over and they didn't know what they were doing, even if they were vicious, I would have felt a little more emotion there. But no, I probably just heartless when it comes to the machines.
Ben Braden goes a little deeper into this. He says, hey guys, perhaps it's just me, but how do you think this game properly incentivizes you to use any other weapon than the hunter bow? And I wanted to bring this up specifically. I brought up the hunter bow before. I found myself intrigued with the rest of the weapons in the game, but the good old hunter bow with high impact and tear damage will do far more damage and more quickly than any of the other weapons. Destroying machines' weak parts is the fastest way to dispose of them, and items like the tripcaster or ropecaster seem very one-use to me that I never bothered using them, which was an issue for me in the first game as well. The other weapons are interesting, but there was never a moment where I felt like there was much point in using anything other than the various hunter bows to inflict status effects and then switching to my strongest hunter bow with damage and tear. I agree, and I wanted to bring up Ben's comment here because there are a variety of bows.
Mm-hmm.
And even then, it's like, but the hunter bow is the only logical bow to use here. You have the little crossbow type thing, like the little snake eyes wrist kind of thing that they got going on. You got the sharpshooter bow that shoots bows or arrows more slowly and a more powerful shot, whatever. But the hunter bow, it all reduced to that. Did you find that as well, or did you explore the different bow types?
I did explore the different bow types, but generally it was, well, I know that this enemy needs frost damage to really be able to take it down. So I'm going to load up all the different bows that have frost damage ammunition or that can use frost damage ammunition. So for me, it was more of a tactical kind of thing, I guess, in a sense, even though I mostly just picked at them until they died. I wasn't always being super tactical about stuff, but I ended up using probably towards the end of the campaign, but before I did a lot of open world stuff, I ended up using a lot of the like special bows, like Regala's bow, or there was another bow that I think once you clear out all the rebel camps you get. I can't remember the name of it. I'm bad with that stuff, but There were a couple of those I used, and even though they were not fully leveled, they were still way overpowered in my opinion. So I ended up using those a little bit more. But the hunter bow, yeah, I mean, those alongside of one of those exploding spears that I mentioned, like most of the machines, unless they had an insane health bar, were not much trouble to take down. So again, my issue with the weapons, like that just further goes into it. It didn't make now I didn't the warrior bow for me, I think, is what I ended up using at least towards the beginning of the game more because um, I had that more leveled up than I did hunter. But once I had things more evened out in the stats, I used those. What I will say I didn't use much is how you could switch between like a single shot and like 3 shots or
Yeah,
whatever. I didn't really vary between those
me
a whole lot,
neither.
and
I
I
didn't
probably
try
should
anything.
have. I would have enjoyed
I
it
don't think
more
I
if I had.
really understood even the mechanics
Yeah,
of it because I saw
yeah,
that I was getting some of these things where it's like you could do this and this, and I'm like,
right.
I don't know, because he asked what earlier in the question what our favorite skill was too, and I just kept using the healing
Oh,
skill,
yeah,
which was like so overpowered. It felt like
right,
because it would just generate I think 40 or 60 health points like every 2 seconds for. So you just activate it at the beginning of a boss fight, and you're basically golden.
right.
And I felt to the point of the difficulty and kind of the funneling of just one weapon and stuff. I guess you could make the game more difficult. That's true in the difficulty settings, much more
Yep.
difficult. And they'll probably do a new game plus with a much more a harder difficulty setting as a patch, which they did for the first one as well, and they typically do for first party games. So there is that, and I understand that. But I don't know. I felt the main quest, like even the last quest when you go to San Francisco, it was
Hmm.
trivial at best.
Yeah,
So there were side quests that were much harder and
yeah.
fighting like the champion, the enduring, is that what they called it?
The enduring, yeah,
She was really
yeah,
cool. I liked that character. That was like
yeah.
the hardest thing in the game. I thought that was kind of like equivalent to the God of War Valkyrie fight to me, the Queen
Okay,
Valkyrie
yeah.
fight, where it was just like, man, this is tough. But it did feel trivial. And again, just they should have balanced the experience or made the cap higher. Even if you don't
Mm,
get anything, like just make the cap higher. Like people just need to see. Or I said this
right.
idea on Sacred Symbols, and I don't know if it's really you could really do it. But even this idea of prestiging in these persistent open
Yeah,
world single player
yeah.
games would be an interesting thing too. But
I
nonetheless,
played. I played. What did you play on normal?
yeah, I did.
That's what I played on too. I have a feeling that based on the way we're talking, that you and I at a higher difficulty probably would have been punished for the way we were playing and had to be more strategic. But on the normal, which is supposed to be the way they recommend you play it, I didn't. Yeah, I wasn't feeling very challenged in the actual combat. It was fun combat, but I wasn't feeling like it was hard combat.
Yeah. Uh, in terms of the skill trees as well, I
Hmm.
have a problem with skill trees in games, a lot of skill trees, and it comes up all the time in Sacred Symbols. I just feel like there are skill trees that are victim of just not being interesting.
Yeah,
Where you get to a point, I felt like Arkham Asylum was a really great example of that, even though I love that game, where it's like, I
yeah,
don't care.
yeah.
Just, this
I
is
didn't
all,
use the trap making skill tree at all. I didn't even put 1 point into it because I didn't care about the traps because they
yeah,
didn't make me care about the traps.
I agree. I tried to eventually I was just swimming in points.
Right.
And so you do things like that. And in terms of crafting, I actually didn't get very deep into crafting. That was one of the last trophies I needed was to just craft one of each because I don't think I was killing enough animals. Although
Hmm.
I love just headshotting like birds and shit.
Yeah.
Just like a pelican or something, just headshotting it with an arrow, just
Yeah.
total overkill. Well, we
So you
presented,
felt bad to kill the machines, and I felt bad to kill the animals.
yeah,
I'm
but that's a
guessing.
little more
Yeah.
logical
Yeah.
how you felt.
Yeah.
Brian Gorlick wrote in and said, "Hey CDC, excluding the superb combat, so we've laid everything out, but he says excluding the superb combat, what was your favorite part of the game? As good as the combat, main story, and side content is, I would have to say my favorite part was going back to the mountain base in between missions to see what Aloy's companions were up to. I found the writing and character development to be so good, so good from Varl's and Zoe's relationship to Catalo's identity crisis after losing his arm, that I was genuinely interested in what they were learning on their foci, and what their interactions were with each other. Since this is all
Mhm.
optional dialogue for the most part, did you take the time to listen to each of them or just move through the story? As always, keep up the great work." So let's talk about what our favorite non-combat part of the game was, and we can talk about the mountain base as well. I like the mountain base too. Two things about it one thing I liked and one thing I thought was weird. I like bases, hideouts, little places like that. I always talk about how I love that shit in Resident Evil games when you
Mhm.
find the room with the bed and you could imagine you're just kind of like taking it easy there and hiding out and trying to stay quiet. I like that. The thing that I thought was strange though is that they're just going in and out of this place over and over again.
Yeah.
No one sees them going in and out of this place.
Right.
It just seems a little too weird to me. And needing to have a base of operations is a little too on the nose gamey to me as well. But it was cool, and I did explore all those story options as well, and there was a lot to see there. But
Yeah.
what would you say apart from the the physical act of playing, like what kept you coming to the game? What did you enjoy the most?
Uh, I don't know what kept me coming to the game other than just the whole thing. I enjoyed it, but the part of the game, the thing about the game that I liked the most was actually the cauldrons. I really enjoyed the cauldrons.
Yeah, they were cool.
I like going in there. There was a little bit of a puzzle aspect to them. Now, granted, they did require some combat, so it's not a direct answer to that question, but that was probably it. And then, if you really want to get outside of combat, the ruins that I mentioned earlier, where you had to go and find the ornaments and everything. I don't like puzzle games generally. I'm
Oh
not a
yeah, me
big
neither.
puzzle game fan,
Ugh.
but I did like those. I enjoyed them. I think
Yeah, because they were easy. That's what I
yeah.
liked about those too.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's true.
I think so too. And then she was constantly saying like, maybe I can do this, and I'm like, and I was like, thanks, Aloy. Like,
Right.
I know a lot of people were complaining about that, but I liked that.
I at one point I actually muted because I was like, I'm going to figure this out by myself, and she keeps offering me suggestions, and I want to not hear them. So I actually muted the sound for one of them. Now, most of the time that stuff did kind of bother me. Like, oh, I should jump on that ledge. Well, no shit. But other times I was fine with it. But for the one, it was the one near Vegas. I was like, no, I'm going to figure this one out by myself. Aloy, stop talking to me.
How'd you feel about the underwater exploration as well? Did you like that? It was pretty.
I really thought it was cool. The environment was cool. I really enjoyed that. What I didn't like was that you couldn't do any kind of combat underwater. And I thought even if you were like hampered in your ability to shoot a bow, you could still shoot a bow underwater. It wouldn't be as good. It wouldn't be as impactful. I get it, but like if I was underwater and there was an enemy, I had no choice but to.
Well, it would have been
run
cool to
away
even
from
just
it,
be able to use your melee
to
weapon.
poke it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right. Well, we're left now with 10 remaining inquiries from the audience that will allow us to touch on some various things as we wrap this up. And of course, at the end, if we feel like we have anything left to say, we can do so. Joey wrote in and said, "Hey, Colin and Ben, keep up the great work for LSM. Just wanted to shout out the masterful and often subtle way the argot of the tribes differ depending on which tribe you're talking to. For example, the Utaru, whose society is shaped around agriculture, use phrases like 'you are from bad soil' or 'a single seed matters little in the infinite cycle of growth and decay.'" Awesome stuff. I agree with this. I think that the whole cadence of the identities of the different tribes and the different warring Tanakh tribes and the peace that's trying to be wrought between these different peoples was interesting. And I like with the exploration of death and song, agriculture, and all the rest. And actually what it reminded me of, although it's probably because I'm watching it right now, is it reminds me a lot of Game of Thrones, with just Diggin and I are always, and Micah and I too are always saying like, you pay the iron price. Like that, that's something that they say on the Iron Islands. It's part of their argot. Right. And they have different things like Summer Child and all of these different things. I think that that's really cool. It adds a level of texture and depth to the world. How did you feel about that, the way that they kind of identified the different people through not only physical identifiers, for instance, like the very Roman influence of one of them, and obviously native stuff and all that, but based on their verbiage as well?
Yeah, I noticed it. I don't know that I put a lot of thought into it, other than the folks at Plainsong. I can't remember what they were called. But the folks at Plainsong,
the grave singers.
They just had a very different cadence. Not even the words they were saying, but the way they were saying them felt a lot different than a lot of the other tribes around. So I thought that added a lot of texture. I mean, you could certainly tell with just even the differences in all the different Tanakh, the different way they thought and the way that their specific, not just their tribe, but like their region was even thinking a little bit differently. And when you went to a place that had obviously just had some trauma, or trauma Aloy caused, like they were speaking in a different way and tone. And I don't even mean just the dialogue words themselves. I mean, like the way that they were presenting and the facial expressions that they implemented, they all seemed very different. And I don't know that I necessarily connected them all to their tribes specifically, but there was certainly a difference between different groups of people that I noticed.
Yeah, it was neat.
I thought it was cool.
I thought it was cool too.
Yeah.
Okay. Lorenzo von Matterhorn wrote in, nice name, says,
Cool name.
"Hey boys, I absolutely adored this game. Surpasses Horizon Zero Dawn in pretty much every respect, with new enemies, weapons biomes, and traversal and exploration options. The small thing that impressed me most was how the dialogue changed slightly depending on what you had or hadn't explored, where Aloy would mention if she was somewhere before or already fixed something. First time I noticed this was when I found the Gemini Cauldron. Couldn't figure out what to do, so left. When Gaia mentioned we had to go to the cauldron with 2 cords about 10 hours later, I had a light bulb moment and thought, hey, I know the place, only for Aloy to say the exact same thing 2 seconds later. It all goes to making the world feel lived in and explorable, I feel. Popped the platinum the other day, so now it's on the Elden Ring. Thanks for all the podcasts each week. Thank you, Lorenzo, for writing in. Yeah, I thought that these little subtle things, this is part of what, and you edit the shows where I always talk about the small things.
Mm-hmm.
And production per square inch, which is a term I've made up to just try to describe like how much work goes into each inch of a game. And I still think The Last of Us Part 2 is a game that is excelling there because it's not open world. But in terms of open worlds, the only game that I can think has a higher production per square inch is maybe Red Dead Redemption 2. Oh. And I mean that in a holistic way. I mean that about everything. And it goes into the dialogue options as well, because first of all, there are dialogue trees to explore optional things. Then there are dialogue options where it's like use your heart, your head, or whatever.
Yeah.
And by the way, I totally didn't realize like you could kill Regala and she will not be with you at the end. You know?
I killed Regala.
Oh, you did?
I murdered her.
Oh yeah, no, she was with me. So I thought that was a really cool thing, and they don't really bring attention to that at all. Like that's a thing. I don't think it would have been cool because you got to play it twice, but it would have been a thing like a trophy could have explored, for instance. But I like that I
killed her. I killed her and got her bow. That's what I was talking about earlier. I don't know if you get her bow.
Okay. I thought maybe you just got something from her and I just didn't.
No. I killed her and they were like, "Here's her bow," and I was like, "This bow's awesome." I don't know why I wouldn't have killed her.
Good for you. She came and fought alongside us, which I thought was kind of interesting.
Nice. I didn't know that was even an option.
Yeah. So that's something to point out is that you can. I spared Regala, and then she comes with us and fights alongside us in San Francisco. I don't know if it makes it any easier or not. I have no idea at all.
Sure.
But I like that there's, so going back to this idea of high production value, and we were talking about, focus testing and all of this, and just, this is an expensive game, $150 million plus game. And there's a lot of little things that go into games like this that make them expensive. And one of the things is this isn't new, but is getting cut off in a conversation and returning to that conversation, which I love that games do that now. And this game does that really well. And then, like he's saying, the situational things that I think make Aloy feel more alive, the way she reacts and talks and some of the dialogue options you have as well. And then some of the bigger choices, like we said with Regala, I think it's neat to have a more lived in world where you don't necessarily have to have Mass Effect style agency, but you can have some sort of effect. I was a little cynical of Uncharted 4 doing this with some of the dialogue choices in their game, but I get it now. I think it's maybe a little cooler than I had given credit for. So how did you feel about the way that the game dealt with these little things, like the little dialogue choices and all the rest?
Yeah, I thought they were cool, specifically with the dialogue trees. Like, I explored every option of them, and then sometimes they would show up as like a highlighted, or they were shown differently if you had not chosen them yet. And there were times that after I had chosen them, I was like, okay, well, I'm going to go over here to this one and see what that one says. And then I accidentally like clicked on the one I had been on before, and it referenced something from the thing that it didn't reference previously. So some of those dialogue choices even seem apparently to change based on what order you had done the other dialogue choices in. Now, it's not impactful necessarily, but she like will reference, well, you just said this, which I hadn't done the first time, so she didn't say that. So then I started exploring those more and wasting a ton of time just listening to dialogue over and over. They mentioned that when she calls things out and she says like this thing's over here or whatever, there was a point where I had found something that must have been quest related and I didn't realize it yet, and I went back by the place. I walked by the place where I had found it, and she actually called out like, this is where I found that whatever part. I need to see what so-and-so will do with that. And I was like, okay, it knows that I've already found it. And also it remembers that this is, not that that's that difficult, I'm sure, but like just the fact that that was a feature, that was a detail that kind of subtly reminded you that that was a thing. Now I know that's a bad thing for some people, but for me it was helpful because I was like, oh yeah, I can go turn this in and get a bow or whatever, whatever the case was. I can't remember specifically now, but I thought that was really cool. And I think when I walked by one of those settlements the one time, and this one of the, not the settlements, but the ruins, that I went in and I didn't finish it. I couldn't figure it out. I was going to come back to it later. And I walked by it later to go to a different machine. And she was like, I really need to get back and find that ornament or something along those lines. Like, so there were definitely those things that I noticed that it picked back up on after you had already done something that kind of expressed that was alive, if the world was still moving.
Sure. There's snowflakes on my eyelashes.
Yeah. I kind of got annoyed at her. Like I'd be here for a minute and she'd be like, "Hey, I'm freezing." And then I'd walk like 2 minutes and she'd be like, "Oh, it's so hot out here." And I'm like, "Oh, okay. Do you want me to
Relax.
am I supposed to change the clothes or I don't know."
It's the 31st century. Find something else to complain about, Aloy. We talked a little bit about the ending earlier, but I wanted to revisit it for one specific reason. Ryan Bassioni wrote in and said, "Hey, gents, wanted to get your thoughts on the ending. While I enjoyed the story overall, I couldn't help but feel that Guerilla didn't stick the ending or the landing on the ending. While we're used to cliffhangers in some movies and TV shows, you don't usually, at least that I can remember, see a cliffhanger like this that is so blatantly spelling out a trilogy as this one does. Wise move, or do you feel they could have done a better job and provided some closure to the story? Thanks, guys." So this does feel very Empire Strikes Back in that way.
Mm-hmm.
I like it. I think it's cool. I feel like in a 3-part structure, you need the middle act. Something must be the middle act. This is the middle act. And so it feels a little darker. It feels incomplete and it's leading to something. I dig it. What I'm curious about is that I don't think that we're as literal as it is. I don't think it's quite clear what's going to happen in the next game.
Mm-hmm.
I could imagine a situation where they have to abandon Earth and go to another planet.
Mm-hmm.
And that is literally the game. I can imagine a situation where, like, and it's a different map, I can imagine a situation where you're in a different part of the world, like we were saying.
Mm-hmm.
And I can imagine a situation where it's exactly the same as this, and you're just in another part of the United States or another part of Canada or wherever you go. So that's more interesting to me. And I think it's Far Zenith's inclusion in the game that kind of opened my mind to the grand storytelling potential of Horizon. So it's exciting from that sense. So I didn't really mind the literal on the head nature of it. How did you feel about the game so clearly telegraphing that there is going to be a third game and really not wrapping up anything as a result? In fact, the ending is pretty short.
Yeah, the shortness of the ending is one of the things I had an issue with. Just that it was like, again, hey, glad you played. See you in 5 years, so you can buy the game again or buy another game. I don't have a problem with that. I kind of expected it to be a trilogy, but I do feel like the way they wrapped it up could have been a little different, a little bit more resolution. It was a little too telegraphed that that's exactly what was going to happen, and they want you to know that's what's going to happen, so you'll look forward to it. But also, there was just so much stuff unresolved in this one that I don't feel like is going to be resolved in the next one. For instance, all of a sudden, Silence goes from everybody knowing he's a bad guy, which I don't think he's ever a bad guy, but they perceive him as a bad guy, to, oh, Silence is walking back down the ramp and now he's going to be one of us. And I guarantee they don't address that contradictory nature until it becomes needed because he betrays them or something in the next game. So, like, I feel like setting up a trilogy is totally fine, and blatantly spelling out that you're going to do another game is fine with me. But at least don't leave all these things hanging to never be resolved if that's going to be the case.
Yeah.
I kind of felt like that was cheap.
Yeah, that's fair enough. It did feel a little cheap, I guess, but they're leaning into Horizon.
Yeah,
and
sure.
we know that now with Call of the Mountain. We're going to be a PSVR 2, probably a launch game, and who knows what the hell that's going to be about. And
yeah,
I'm sure we're not I honestly don't think we're too far away from discovering Horizon TV show or something is in the works at some point. So they ain't done. All right. Sean Kelvey Jr. wrote in, said, "Hey guys, what were your reactions when you finally got the ability to fly on a Sunwing? I thought it brought the game to another level. Seeing the beautiful world from that view is just breathtaking. I really love this game and can't wait for the inevitable sequel to complete the trilogy." So I liked this as well. I thought this was really cool. This reminds me, for all of you JRPG guys out there, the Sunwing, I felt like, played the role of airship in the game. And I thought that was kind of neat. It was easy to fly. You used it to get around. It kind of telegraphed that it was going to happen because there are parts of the game, and there's even a specific side quest that you just cannot get to without the Sunwing. So, and I think that might be, I was making fun of that trophy earlier about 2 flying quests, but I think that might have existed to try to provoke people to explore that maybe. But
sure.
I thought that the Sunwing was really neat. And I thought in general, the enemy variety was pretty cool, but let's focus on the aerial stuff as well first. What I liked most, Ben, about the Sunwing was the almost religious aspect of it, that people were like, holy shit, you're riding on the wings of the 10 or whatever they would say. But that it wasn't, as I said earlier, it wasn't so impressive. Once Silence teaches these people to the sons of Prometheus or whatever to override machines. So that no longer is like in and of itself impressive, even though Aloy's reputation precedes her. That particular part of her is not that special anymore, but this revives that mysticism when she's on the back of the Sunwing, which not even Silence could do and not even teach them how to do it. So anyway, how did you feel about riding it?
I thought it was cool. I really enjoyed the mechanics. The fact that you could get to places easier than before was a nice addition. I had two problems with it though, and one was that I couldn't find the Sunwings like at my disposal anytime I wanted to, basically, which makes some sense that they're supposed to be like more special and revered part of the game. The other problem was sometimes I was like, oh, I could fly over there. And then I was like, oh, I could just use this campfire and be there immediately instead of doing that. So I would have appreciated, and I agree about that trophy thing. Like, I never would have gone and done any missions on a Sunwing had it not been for that trophy. That was one of the ones I had to clean up at the end.
That must have been, that's what happens when you focus test your games. I think that must be one of those.
Yeah.
Like,
I do think it would have been cool to have some other flying enemies, like that you could fight from the Sunwing. And maybe there were, and I didn't catch it, but I would have liked to have combat in the air on the Sunwing. That would have been fun.
Well, let's continue talking about machines. Brandon Young wrote in and said, hey, Colin and Ben, what was your guys' favorite new machine from the Forbidden West? I personally want to give a shout out to the Shell Snapper. Watching that absolute unit of a machine belly flop on top of me in slow motion for the first time is something I will never forget. The Slither Fang is another obvious choice. Thanks for the awesome content. So I think there's a lot of cool new machines and some awesome returning machines as well. Shout out to the Shell Walker, who I find quite endearing and cute. And I like the Shell Walker. I was happy to see them come back. But hey, man, shout out to the Spectres as far as the new machines are concerned. It was nice to see a different kind of machine. We kind of have this combat binary in the Horizon games wherein you're fighting the humans and then you're fighting the machines, but there's almost like a third type now. And I dug that. I dug their design. I like that there's a lot of sharpness, sharp edges, and all of that with the old machines. And this is all about curve and nano machines and higher technology even. So that stands out to me. What new machine or machine generally stood out to you the most?
It was the one that looked like a big turtle new. Is that the Shell Snapper?
I think that's the Shell Snapper, yes.
That's the one I like. I think that was new. I wasn't 100% sure if it was new.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed that one just because I like turtles a lot. I mean, that's the reality of why I like that one.
There were 21 old machines and 22 new machines in the game.
Yeah. I couldn't remember for sure because I know that I was not nearly as expansive or exploratory with Zero Dawn as I was with this game. So there could have been machines I never saw in Zero Dawn. I will say I absolutely hated the Slitherfang because I felt like it was a little bit cheap. The combat with it was a little bit cheap because it would just flop and then slither around and like knock you out of even being able to like draw your bow at points. So I didn't like that one. The elephant looking ones, again, I don't know these names. I'm sorry, but
the elephant is the Tremor Tusk, I think.
The Tremor Tusk. That one I really enjoyed. Was that new?
Yeah, that's new.
Okay, so I really enjoyed the design of it. But the hardest, I spent 5 hours trying to get the hunting ground with the Tremor Tusk where you had to knock off the tusk.
Oh, yeah. I have to come back to that one.
It's the last one I did, and it drove me absolutely insane. So screw the Tremor Tusk, but also I think he looks cool, and elephants are neat. So.
Yeah, for that one, I remember that one specifically because what I ended up having to do, because you have those other enemies that are distracting you.
Yeah.
You just have to kind of move quickly and override them.
That's what I did.
Yeah,
that's what I ended up doing. It still took me a ton of times.
Yeah, me too. That exact one sucked.
Yeah.
Ahead the game wrote in and said, hey, boys, after the popularity of Gwent in The Witcher 3, I'm not surprised board games like this are showing up in open world games. That said, while I enjoy Machine Strike and find it to be a nice diversion, I'm never ignoring the rest of the game to play it like I was with Geralt's story. What are your thoughts on Strike in the game? Thanks for all the great work. I think it's actually Geralt, sorry. So Strike is kind of the in-game game that they play, the Gwent type game. We've seen a million of these different games. Yep. Triple Triad from Final Fantasy VIII, of course. But I only mess with it for the trophies. In the beginning, you have to play it, and then I found someone else to play to get the trophy towards the end.
Yeah.
I didn't really quite understand it, and I find it a little cynical. Mm-hmm. I was saying how the game does so many small things right, and I'm so glad about that. The quick travel system is immaculate. The map is clean and readable. The UI works great. I love how you can pop things up and take things off and make the UI custom. There's so many of the HUD, it's really wonderful. But I feel like this is cynical because this is like just a move where they're saying this game didn't need to be in here.
Yeah.
And that's cool that you had a little bit of something to do, but they're hoping that it turns into Gwent. Like you can tell, and it's not going to, but you can tell that you're going to get a lot of these. It reminds me in a way of 15 years ago, 10 years ago, every game having online multiplayer in the hope against hope that maybe it would turn into something, and that it was really just a cynical ploy for you to not sell your game back. And that was all that it was. And this just seems like a cynical thing to say, like, well, maybe this can be Gwent. Because I don't think when The Witcher 3 had Gwent in it that they thought that Gwent would be a spinoff and that it would be really popular and all of that. And so that everyone's eyes are open to that. I can't help but see that and feel like that has to be true. How did you feel about Machine Strike?
I was similar to you. I played the first match in Chain
Scrape.
Scrape.
Are you do you have fucking amnesia?
Dude, I remember things by seeing them, not by their names. So it's hard for me. Like I can tell you where something is on a map, but I don't remember the name of it.
Chain.
You're lucky I got that much.
Yeah,
right?
I know.
So names and places I've always been bad with until it's driven into my brain. Anyway, I played that one, and then that was one of the wrap-up trophies I did, was going and doing another one. I went to all the hunting grounds and bought all the pieces I possibly could, because I was like, well, this is going to take me a while to figure out the rhythm of this. And then I beat the second one in the first try, and I was like, I don't even understand the game, and I don't have any desire to, because if I'm going to sit down and play Horizon, I'm going to do everything else that I enjoy more than play a board game that isn't that fascinating to me. Now, granted, I didn't give it a whole lot of try, and maybe it would have grown on me, but it just didn't instantly appeal to me.
I feel like we would know at this point if Strike was going to be a thing. Because I could recall that I feel like they even wrote a PlayStation blog post at some point, like last year, about Machine Strike and this idea of this in-game game and all of this. So there's more to it than that. I just feel a little cynical about it. It's cool to have game designers sitting around making this stuff up, but you want it to be an iOS game. I know.
Right.
I know you. Come on.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Oh, we already did this one. We can delete that one. So we have 4 more. Austin Savard wrote in and said, hey, friends, where do you guys fall on the idea for DLC with Horizon Forbidden West? Personally, I'd like to see something along the lines of First Light, the infamous Second Son DLC, but I wouldn't be surprised if they go for a Ghost of Tsushima Legends route, with the players being an explosive expert and one being a trapper, etc. Thanks for the endless entertainment, boys. So the thing about this is that Horizon is begging for multiplayer. I don't know how this doesn't get multiplayer. I don't know if that's all you're going to get, but if Ghost of Tsushima gets multiplayer, then this must get multiplayer. This is begging for it. I don't understand. Horizon, I think, is rife for a multiplayer spinoff, very similar to what I felt about Last of Us Factions. So that's one area that they can explore. But per our earlier conversation, Ben, I think that there's potential to bridge the games very similar to the purpose. Now, later on, it didn't serve the purpose at the time, but Shadows of the Empire, the book, the Star Wars book, is the book that takes place in between The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. Now, you can see one movie and then the next, and everyone did at the time, and there were no wiser to it. But in 95, 96, whenever Shadows of the Empire came out, it finally filled in the gap between The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi and tells us what the hell happened.
But it doesn't matter because it's not canon anymore.
Right, exactly, which is just brutal. Because that's like such a wonderful story, Prince Seashore and all that. But I feel like if we're worried about the kind of quick timing of this and how they're going to segue to this new reality, I think it would not only be good for storytelling, but probably really good for their pocketbooks, because they can do like a $20 or $30 DLC pack, like you said, a First Light style thing, and fill it in, have a small map, which is what they did with Frozen Wilds. But I think this can serve a much more basic narrative function, because if people think the game ended quickly, then certainly the new one's going to start quickly. And if you think about the end of Empire Strikes Back and how dark that was, and then we kind of just get right into the what's going on Tatooine. Well, we have a lot more knowledge about that when we read the book. So anyway, I'm talking a lot. What do you think about the potential for DLC here?
I think they'll definitely do DLC, and I think that you're right that it should be more story-based, but I think that I'm more cynical about the idea that they'll actually fill in some gaps, because we know that for not Forbidden West, Frozen Wilds was not very story heavy and didn't really lend itself a whole lot to Forbidden West. And I feel like they know that a game that's probably going to sell 15 or 20 million copies, maybe a little less than the original, just because of it being a sequel, they're not going to sell that many pieces of DLC. So if they tie anything together that's actually impactful, a lot of people are going to miss it and be confused, and then they'll have to put it in a wrap up at the beginning of the next
Yeah,
game. And
sure enough.
I feel like it'll be a good DLC. Whether I'll play it or not is yet to be seen. And it'll be fun, and it'll expand a little bit more, and maybe you'll get a few lore drops, but that's not going to be what you and I want. It's not going to be more exploration. This is just my opinion, of course. It's not going to be more exploration of the main story and shed any real light on the next chapter. In my opinion, they're too smart for that. They know what the consumer needs and wants. The average consumer needs and wants more than they know what is good for people like you and I who are going to dig into that lore and explore.
Eleazar wrote in and said, "Hello, CMB. What do you all think about the tribe politics in the game? I'm not saying politics don't belong in games, but it seems to get in the way of the actual story of the game. I just want to know what is happening with Aloy's mission and with the Zeniths, but constantly before Aloy is allowed to progress, she has to help out in some way, reluctantly in most cases. How can we be made to care about all these different tribes and what they do if even Aloy sees them as a hindrance towards the true goal? I loved the game and can't wait for a sequel, but I hope that they are able to intertwine the goals of the tribes more towards the actual goal and villain." I wanted to bring this up for multiple reasons here. Number one is, you were in politics, so it's cool to talk about politics. So you were the mayor of your town, and the locality. All politics is local, of course, as the old saying goes. And to kind of reiterate and put a finer point on a point that I think we brought up earlier, which is this game in exploring the small things makes it feel big, and that people are worried about day to day, week to week, month to month, cycle to cycle things in their lives, and they don't care or know anything about this. They don't. Aloy is a mystical character to many of these people. When they see her, they know it's her because she has flowing. She's beautiful and has this red hair, and she rides a mount and all these kinds of things. But nonetheless, they have the small things that they need to worry about. They don't understand the existential crisis. They don't know, which is why I think the third game has so much interesting potential. But I like that they have to. I like that Aloy is stymied by small things. It feels real and makes the game feel big, because otherwise I think the game would feel just like a linear game. If it was just beat to beat and it was just the Far Zeniths and all of that, I think it would be boring, because then she's fighting to save and protect these people and they don't even really know it. So there's something really endearing about that. So how did you feel about the tribal politics and the way it played in? And by the way, I'm surprised more people aren't into it, because they avoid real world politics in this game. There's nothing in this game that's like, there's a transgender character and there's gay relationships and all this kind of stuff, but it's not beating you over the head with any of it at all. And so I think it's the exact opposite. I feel like it feels, again, real. What do you think?
I think for me, it was kind of like indicative of the fact that, I mean, that is kind of how politics works, right? There's an actual goal, and to get there, there's 15 hurdles to jump over before you can get there. So like, it kind of is relatable in that sense. And again, it goes to show, like, part of it's Aloy's fault because she won't just tell everybody what's going on. Part of it I understand, because like, if she did, they'd probably collapse as a society, whatever society they have left. So I understand why she doesn't do that, but they have no clue that she's got this bigger mission that's actually more important than what they have going on, because the thing that they have going on, the thing that you have going on, is always the most important thing to you. So I understand it. And I think that goes back to my point of, even though Aloy is annoyed a little bit by this stuff and she doesn't want to be delayed by these things happening, she actually cares enough that she's going to help solve some of them. Now, some of them you actually have to solve to progress through the story, but I think it sheds more light on the world. It makes the world feel more alive. I do think there were some of that stuff put in there, specifically like when you go and have to go and recruit the marshals, and you have to get them to come and to have the big battle to pick out the marshals. I felt like that whole section of that was like, okay, this is too long, and it feels like they're just doing it to extend gameplay. But it didn't change the point that, like, you got to see those interpersonal conflicts, those societal conflicts, really. And that makes the world feel deeper than it actually is. Or maybe not than it actually is. That makes the world feel deeper than if it weren't there.
Fair enough. We've gotten far enough without talking about this character in depth, but we have to touch on him before we go. Jordan wrote in and said, "My squishy boys, my son Crustlin's birth on 2/21 kicked off a month of paternity leave that allowed me to spend a good chunk of time getting the Platinum and Horizon Forbidden West newborns sleep a lot. I haven't had this much free time to spend immersed in the game in more than a decade. It was a great time. My one major gripe was how they handled Ted Farrow. I thought not showing what he had become was a total cop-out and robbed us of an incredible moment. The hair on my neck stood up when we realized that he was still alive, but was followed by disappointment with his off-screen death. Totally lame. Ted Faro is controversial.
Yeah.
Controversial character. I like how they deal with this with Alva and the Quen, where they call the Ted clone CEO. And when they were calling him that, I was like, that's so funny.
Yeah.
I was like, and I didn't know if it was intentional, and then quickly it becomes obvious that they're just misreading CEO.
Right.
I don't know. This character seems to me to be taking the piss out of Silicon Valley types and seems to be pretty on the nose. I think maybe that is a little annoying, but you're not supposed to like Ted Faro. Ted Faro is the reason that Zero Dawn needed to be created to begin with and is at the center of all of this drama. So how do you feel about Ted Faro? Is he maligned for a good reason, or is he just a bad character?
I think he's morally dark. And I mean that usually we say morally gray. He is more bad than good, but he's still got some good motivation there. Like I feel like he's very wrong and perhaps selfish in what he's doing, but I don't feel like his intentions are solely at the root of being bad. To their question about, or their statement about being disappointed about not seeing their death, I felt like to make the story point that a character transformed or whatever and was alive for another 1,000 years only to not get to see them was kind of silly to me. Maybe they just didn't have an idea of what they wanted that to be, or maybe it was, I don't know, it was time constraints, but that was a little disappointing. And frankly, I don't even, I'm having a hard time remembering now. How did his death actually happen?
Yeah, I'm gonna look now. Hold on a second.
Okay. But my whole point there was just like, if you're going to make it a plot point that this character is alive for so long, let me interact with it in some way, shape, or form.
Oh my God, this is like the longest fucking Wikipedia article I've ever seen. Oh yeah, here it is. After almost a millennium, Ted Faro had survived thanks to Sompto's treatments. However, his attempts to stop his mutations had failed by the time he was discovered by Aloy and the Quen, right? So what happens during that? All that remained was a grotesque being of twisted flesh with little brain activity filling much of the generator room and incapable of speech. Aloy saw a rendition of Faro's mutated form through a hologram, and CEO, who entered the room, saw the mutated form itself, recognizing it as Ted Faro. Being shocked at the sight of what he'd seen, CEO ordered his bodyguards to burn Faro's mutated form, triggering the generator safeguard protocol, which resulted in a meltdown that buried the bunker in lava together with the thing that was once Ted Faro. This is according to horizon.fandom.com.
Okay, I didn't realize that they did something intentionally to dispose of him.
Yeah, I'm not sure I got that either, actually.
Yeah. I mean, I knew it was terminated essentially, but it took the wind out of the sails a little bit. I feel like after all that time, we should be able to see a 1,000-year-old character.
Finally, and this is something we touched on in the beginning, but we'll end with it. Adaholic wrote in and said, "Hey guys, I'm curious what you think about the discourse of this game specifically related to Elden Ring. Seems like this game has had a lot of negativity surrounding it compared to Elden Ring just by being in the same proximity of it, and I don't think it's super fair or warranted. The game to me is a massive step up over the first in terms of story, characters, and world, so it's just bizarre to hear some of the negative chatter. Do you think maybe the first one was a bit overhyped and that led us down this path? I'm curious to your thoughts. Thanks, as always, boys." Thank you. I want to end here because I think that what I want to kind of discuss as we close is just the future of this game. It feels like it didn't reach its potential commercially. Mm-hmm. I don't know what that means. I don't feel like Sony's talking about the sales numbers, which isn't a great sign, although maybe they'll have more to say soon. But I feel like, I hope this game kind of persists and has greater legs and finds its audience, because I think it's really a wonderful game. And the comparisons to Elden Ring, I think, have been unfortunate because I just think they're two different games, and I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure that Elden Ring. I don't know. I've played 20 hours of Elden Ring. I'm comfortable enough to talk about it in some way, and not really understanding the hype to the level that it is, and not seeing Horizon as this kind of more middling game that some people see it as. And I think it's just, I don't think it has to do with the first game. I just think there's something about Elden Ring that just makes people want to, shit on everything else compared to it. And so I think it's hurt Horizon. I think that's my opinion. How do you feel about that?
I feel like you're right. And again, I haven't played a ton of Elden Ring, but the discourse I'm seeing, like, and you and Dustin both, who's a huge Souls fan, has made jokes about how the Elden Ring community is, or how the Souls community is, what they are. Obviously, that's a generalization and probably not true for everybody, but I feel like that a lot of that's being driven by the people who are more in the Souls community. Now, with all that said, like, it's fine to compare games, but like you said, they're two different games. I don't compare God of War to Super Mario World, and these games aren't as far apart as those two are. But like, I think you can. I don't know why people can't talk about two games that come out in a similar proximity without directly comparing them to each other. When you do reviews, you shouldn't base a review on, well, this was better than the last game I reviewed, so it gets a higher score. Like, that's not how things work. And to me, it's just a little bit of a weird conversation. I understand a lot of the criticisms of Horizon. I don't necessarily agree with all of them, and even the ones I do agree with don't necessarily bother me all that much. But it's certainly being overshadowed, and it's disappointing. I think we'll see if they release, even if they don't reveal any numbers anytime soon. If we start hearing about plans for this coming to PC anytime soon, sooner than any of their other games, we'll know that they're going to they need to pump the numbers on it. But I'm sure they've made their money back by this point.
Oh yeah, I'm sure the game has sold millions of copies, but it's softer than I thought it would be. Even in the light of Elden Ring, which I think is, and I said on the show, like, I just didn't know Elden Ring was going to be this big. I don't know why I didn't know that, but
you take a beloved franchise and turn it on its head, it's gonna. I mean, again, to talk about God of War, we all knew what God of War was in the past, and then it changed, and it was all the rage. And so for the Souls community, we all knew what Souls was before, and then they put out Elden Ring, and there's a lot of things that are the same, but it changed. And I think maybe a little bit of this Horizon is a lot different. The Forbidden West is a lot different than Zero Dawn, but in very many ways, it's the same. It's another Horizon game. So I kind of understand that, but I just go back to, I don't think we need to compare games that aren't supposed to be competing. They're not in the same space. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, I agree. But that's the reality right now. Horizon Forbidden West out there on PS4 and PS5. We loved it. We hope you enjoy it too. We hope you enjoyed our conversation. Thank you so much for your love, kindness, and support of all things Sacred Symbols, Last Stand Media. We couldn't do it without you. Ben, thank you for being here. Appreciate you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so go support Ben. Do you have any closing comments here about where people can find you, or you do your Twitch streaming and all of the rest? Do you care to promote any of that?
I'm on Twitter. The name was on the beginning, and yeah, I stream on Twitch. I stream a lot of Sea of Thieves. So come hang out.
Okay, cool, man.
You can find me.
That's good. Thank you, Ben, for that. Very tempting promotion of yourself. And thank you all out there for your love, kindness, and support. Again, we'll see you next time for more conversations, more interviews, all the rest. Until then, goodbye. Sacred Symbols, a PlayStation podcast, is a product and trademark of Last Stand Media and Collins Last Stand LLC, and is proudly recorded in the USA. The show is conceived by, is written by, and is directed by me, Colin Moriarty. My co-hosts are Chris Raygun Maldonado and Dustin Furman. The show is produced by executive producer Dustin Furman. It's edited by associate producer Ben Smith. All of Last Stand's theme music is by my best friend, Ramon Narvaez. As you know, all of Last Stand's shows, including Sacred Symbols, are fan-funded on Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia. The following names are at the producer level on Patreon, our highest tier, and we're grateful for your thoughtful and kind contributions to our independent endeavor. Thank you.